Chapter 342. No wonder fourth young Master Jiang was so brave that night and fought fiercely all night. Unexpectedly, he was drugged. No wonder Miss Wanwan said that fourth young Master Jiang was especially passionate that night and refused to stop no matter how much she begged. It should have been the wine that was drugged, Ning Shu said. That night's banquet was very crowded, but only fourth young master was drugged. This means that it was not in the food that everyone could eat, but in the wine. Fourth young master, do you remember the situation that night? Did you notice anyone touching your wine? Jiang Sai weakly said, that night, other than His Highness the Seventh Prince who left the banquet early, everyone was very happy. I was forced to drink a lot of wine. Later on, I really can't remember clearly. I only remember that the people sitting on my left were the envoy and Miss Susu, and on my right was eldest young Master Tan. Father, I was wronged. As he spoke, Jiang Sai's tears flowed down. Minister Jiang hugged him with heartache, and the father and son wailed loudly. Good boy. Father, good boy. Father, her ears hurt from the howling, and she could not get anything else out of him. Ning Shu hurriedly pulled Xiahou Qing and ran out of the Jiang Fu, thinking, no wonder Jiang Sai could be raised to such a debauchee appearance. This father's contribution cannot go unnoticed. It was only when they were 1 li away from the Jiang Fu that Ning Shu's buzzing ears finally calmed down, and she rubbed her temples. What's wrong? Xiahou Qing asked. Ning Shu sincerely said, my daughter takes back her previous words. Compared to Jiang Daren, His Highness the heir's method of raising children cannot be more brilliant. Xiahou Qing asked again, only this? Ning Shu thought for a moment and said, His Highness's face is also very useful. Just now, it was all thanks to His Highness's presence. Otherwise, my daughter would not have been able to enter the Jiang Fu today. Xiahou Qing was still not satisfied. What else? Also, Ning Shu did not know if she was overthinking it or not, but His Highness the heir seemed particularly different today. Could it be that he was acting spoiled? Ning Shu looked at him and said, also, His Highness looked very good in this frost-colored robe today. Xiahou Qing smiled and said, you have good taste. She was a little dizzy from that faint smile. Her cheeks were dyed with a thin layer of red and her palms were slightly warm. Pour me a cup of tea, Xiahou Qing said. All right. Ning Shu hurriedly poured a cup of tea and handed it to Xiahou Qing. When Xiahou Qing took the teacup, he didn't hold it tightly for the first time. Ning Shu hurriedly reached out to catch it for him, and the two hands held together. Ning Shu's heart was beating wildly. Her eyes first fell on their intertwined hands, and then unconsciously fell on his beautifully shaped thin lips again. She swallowed silently. No wonder King Ju knew that Deji was a fox, but he could not escape from her evil hands. This was because some foxes in this world were born with the ability to take people's lives. There was one right in front of her. What to do? She seemed to be falling into the vixen's trap. Just as Ning Shu was distracted, the curtains of the horse carriage were suddenly pulled open. Ning Shu hurriedly retracted her hand, and the two separated. Heaven's Inquisition came in from outside, sweating profusely. He picked up the teapot on the table and poured the tea into his mouth. When the teapot was empty, he wiped his mouth and said with a smile of exultation, can you guess? Oh my God, Susu is actually the descendant of that female ghost. After he finished speaking, he realized that the atmosphere in the carriage was a little strange. He secretly glanced at Shiz's expression, and the alarm in his heart rang. He hurriedly wanted to leave. Xiahou Qing said lightly, since you're here, you can leave after you finish speaking. Heaven's Inquisition. It seemed that he was going to be beaten for making a mistake. What should he do? Hui Mo, He Yang, someone come and save me. Ning Shu suppressed the heat on her face. Business was more important, so she said seriously, which female ghost? Shui Hongi. Heaven's Inquisition replied. He was still a little shocked. To be exact, she's the descendant of the Shui family. Shui Hongi's ancestors were famous generals in the founding of our dynasty. Although the Shui family was not as glorious as their ancestors, it was still a general's residence. It was indeed a famous family. Susu's father was once a retainer of the Shui family. 24 years ago, General Shui was accused of colluding with the enemy and was executed by the emperor. His trusted subordinates were all demoted to slaves and could never rise again, including Susu's father. Now, almost all the people of the Shui family are dead. That's why I said that Susu is barely the descendant of Shui Hongi. Chapter 343. Why is it Shui Hongi again? This was the first thing that came to Ningxu's mind after hearing the story. She had thought that Shui Hongi was just a cover used by the murderer to cover up his crime. Who would have thought that one after another, people related to the case had deep connections with her? The old woman who was skinned and died was her servant when she was alive. The procuress of Xuanfang Terrace used to be her old acquaintance from the same brothel. Now, Susu is also related to her. This is already the third person related to Shui Hongi. Xiao Qing nodded. His brows showed that he was deep in thought. Ningxu said, "Could it be that we were investigating in the wrong direction from the beginning?" She immediately denied this conjecture. But Li Yi and Zhu Xiong have nothing to do with Shui Hongi. Why was she chosen to be the target of the blame? Xiao Qing said, "Perhaps this relationship was hidden very well and we didn't discover it. Or perhaps, the two were indirectly related through another person or another matter. In short, from the current situation, this Shui Hongi is worth our time to investigate." Tian Wen thought of something and joked, "Speaking of this Shui, Shaoqing Tan's cousin seems to also have the surname Shui. Could it be another person related to Shui Hongi? Although my cousin's surname is also Shui, it's not that Shui family. It's the Shui family of Dingju. She's my aunt's daughter. Please don't misunderstand." When they returned to the Supreme Court and asked Tan Siwei about Shui Chengwei, Tan Siwei hurriedly explained, "Although Chengwei looks a little naughty, she's actually a very sensible child. Since she came to my house at the age of 5, I've watched her grow up. A case like the sudden death of an envoy, a little girl like her couldn't have been involved. Really, I can guarantee it with my life." Seeing that Tan Siwei was so anxious that sweat was about to come out of his forehead, Ningxu hurriedly said, "Shaoqing, don't worry. I just suddenly thought of it and thought it was a coincidence, so I asked. Now that I know the truth, I don't want to misunderstand." Tan Siwei was relieved. He wiped the sweat from his temples and said, "That's good, that's good." He continued, "So, Shu wants to dig up Shui Hongi's old case and investigate it again?" "Yes. The case that Shui Hongyi committed that year was quite sensational at the time, and there should be a record of it in the Supreme Court. If possible, I would like to ask Shaoqing to send someone to take me there." "That's not a problem. I'll go with Shu." Ningxu said, "Shaoqing is busy with official business. I can look for him myself." Tan Siwei said eagerly, don't worry. This case is the most important thing right now. How can I watch you work alone? It's almost evening now, and we don't have much time left. One more person is one more helper." Ningxu glanced at Xiao Qing behind her. Seeing his calm expression, she said, "Go." Ningxu relaxed and said, "Then I'll have to trouble Shaoqing." Just as she was about to leave, she thought for a moment and ran to Xiao Qing's side. She said, "Your Highness, please rest. I'll be back soon." Then, she walked with Tan Siwei into the Supreme Court's archives. In the early summer evening, the weather was a little stuffy. The slanting sun shone into the room through the window lattice and sprinkled on Xiao Qing's lapel. It seemed to dye the cold frost with a layer of light orange. It was such a charming and warm color, but it made his lips appear even paler and colder. The brocade covering his eyes fluttered lonely in the rare evening breeze. After a long time, he said in a low self-deprecating tone, "A blind man." Chapter 344. In the archives of the Supreme Court, there were records of all the serious cases that had occurred in the Yu dynasty since the founding of the country. Opening the door to the storeroom and walking in, Tan Siwei pointed to the 3 rows on his right and said, "The records of more than 20 years are all here." Ningxu nodded. Just walking past the rows of record shelves, she seemed to smell the blood and tears that had been hidden in the records for many years. There were tens of millions of people in the Yu dynasty. Just the number of serious cases that occurred each year numbered in the hundreds. All of them were stored in the Supreme Court's enormous archives and cleaned up every 50 years. Fortunately, Xuehongyi's record was still there, but it would be difficult to fish it out from the sea for a while. Ning Xu and Tan Siwei each stood at the head of the bookshelf and the other at the end. They had a few officials from the Supreme Court helping them. In order to facilitate the search, the bookshelves were lit with candles, which were as warm and orange-red as the sunset outside. Tan Siwei piled the files he had read into a small mountain, and when he was done, he put them back into the bookshelves. After flipping through hundreds of books, he rubbed his tired eyes and looked to the side at Ning Xu's quiet and serious face not far away. The flickering candlelight outlined the beautiful curve of Ning Xu's face. It was like the most beautiful ripple in the world, gently teasing his heart. A wave of heat surged in his heart. He suddenly wanted to say something to her. "My uncle was a famous scholar in Dingju," he said. "He pursued knowledge all his life. He traveled north and south, and was confident and at ease. After he met my aunt, he took her with him. The two of them traveled almost all over the 9 provinces. They were both strange people in the eyes of the world. Even my grandfather was angry before he died, saying that my aunt had entrusted herself to the wrong person." Hearing him say this, Ning Xu looked to the side and gave him some of her attention. "But that's not the case in Shaoqing's eyes, is it?" Tan Siwei's eyes flashed. He smiled and said, "Yes. The first time I saw my uncle was when I was 4 years old. He and my aunt walked all the way from the northern wasteland to here. It took them half a year to get here. When they arrived in the capital and knocked on the door of my house, his face was full of stubble. He didn't look like a scholar at all, but more like a peddler. The housekeeper confirmed it 3 times, and only dared to invite them into the house when his aunt took off her veil hat. When my grandfather saw him, he turned and left, leaving my father to sigh a few times to my aunt in order to make it easier for them to settle down. The first time I saw him, I felt like a stranger. I hid behind a stone pillar to look at him. When he saw me, he laughed and walked towards me. His 2 rough hands lifted me up into the sky. Before that day, no one had ever told me what it was like outside of the capital. Outside of Great Yu, there were countless cities and countries, large and small. In addition to the wide, flat, and boring bluestone roads, there were also towering mountains that reached into the clouds and endless oceans. Moreover, no one has ever told me that not everyone has black eyes and black hair like us. There are countless kinds of people in the 9 regions, and there are countless ways to live. The first time I heard it, I was stunned. Just by listening to Tan Siwei's description, Ning Xu also felt that he was a very wonderful person. She smiled and said, "No wonder Shaoqing later set his goal of traveling to the famous mountains and great rivers." Tan Siwei rubbed his hands in embarrassment and said, "Yes, my father always thought that I was fascinated by the mountains and rivers. I didn't dare to tell him that when I was 4 years old, I was already fascinated." I looked at his face full of stubble, but his bright smile. I looked at my aunt, who used to be as delicate as a flower, because he had become a different person. Her face was no longer as white and smooth, but her smile was more beautiful than before. I thought to myself, if only I could become a person like her in the future. Regardless of whether he was a swordsman in a novel, a doctor in a book, or just a simple traveler, he would go and see all the interesting things in the world, every person born by the heavens, and even different places. Every grain of sand had a different appearance. When I was 20 or 30 years old, I could meet a woman like my aunt and ask her to become my wife. Even if I didn't have an afterlife, it would be a great fortune. Chapter 345. After he finished speaking, Tan Siwei said somewhat shyly, "I'm so unambitious. I've embarrassed myself in front of you." Ning Xu smiled and said, "If a person has no ambition, even if he reincarnates 10,000 times, he will only live the same life as he did in his first life. He will be like a walking corpse. Shaoqing's wish is more meaningful than most of us. How can I not laugh at it?" Tan Siwei had been ridiculed and ridiculed by countless people since he was young. Some said that he was the son of the prime minister and was admired by tens of thousands of people, but he didn't know how lucky he was and that his brain was damaged. There were also some who said that he had deviated from the norm, that he was strange, and that he was really a weirdo. Even his parents would invite doctors and teachers to his house every few days to try and cure his whimsical dream. In his impression, Ning Shu was the first person to tell him that his wish wasn't laughable, and that it was worthy of respect. The warmth in his heart grew stronger, and he was also touched. It was as if he had searched for a long time in a vast sea of people and finally found someone who understood him. Tan Siwei's eyes flickered, and he continued to pour out his heart. Since I was 12 years old, I began to try and leave my home, but I failed time and time again. In the end, I became the laughingstock of the entire capital. When I was 16, I made a promise with my father. If I could follow his wishes and become an official within 8 years and sit in his position, I could resign and leave the capital to do as I pleased. That was the only choice I could make at the time, so I agreed. At the time, I thought that as long as I worked hard, I could do it. But later, I realized that I had overestimated myself. Not to mention 8 years, I'm afraid that I won't be able to fulfill my promise with him in my entire life. Because I'm not cut out to be an official. Many people outside say that I'm experienced in doing things, that I'm considerate in all aspects, and that I'm very much like my father. But what they don't know is that it was actually my elder brother who secretly reminded me of these things. Compared to me, he's actually the one who can satisfy my father's expectations. From the beginning to the end, I've always been that ridiculous Tang Tang who wanted to fly into the sky with a big kite on my back. Ning Shu shook her head disapprovingly when she saw his face filled with loneliness and self-mockery. Xiaoqing is too modest. I already know that yesterday at Funning Palace, there were nearly 100 officials present, but not a single one of them dared to step forward and accept this case. Only Xiaoqing was willing to take on this responsibility and even spoke up for me in front of Assistant Minister Wang. This kind of bravery is something that many marquises cannot compare to. Tan Siwei smiled and said, "You don't have to comfort me. Even if I know it's a joke, I will still work hard." He paused and instinctively took a few steps towards Ning Shu. If I'm really lucky enough to fulfill my promise with my father and leave the capital, are you willing to?" A short sentence was spoken in a disjointed and uneasy manner. He raised his eyes and looked nervously and expectantly at Ning Shu. Finally, he asked, "Are you willing to travel with me?" 2 bookshelves away, they could hear the sound of the other officials quickly flipping through the files. Tan Siwei's trembling voice was not loud, but he had already mustered the greatest courage in his heart. Looking at his puppy-like eyes, Ning Shu froze. Her heart rolled back and forth for a long time. She put down the half-flipped file in her hands and walked in front of Tan Siwei. She solemnly bowed to him and decided to be honest with him. "I'm sorry. I lied to you about one thing and caused you to misunderstand. Actually, the person who was chatting with you in the prison wasn't me." Tan Siwei's eyes widened and he revealed a startled expression. Then, his eyes flashed and he finally understood Ning Shu's completely different attitude from before. He said softly, "So, I misunderstood. Shua doesn't have me in her heart." Ning Shu's silent response was the best answer. Tan Siwei's heart sank. He then said in a panic, "I'm really muddle-headed. Not only am I blind and heartless, I also thought too highly of myself and came to propose marriage. No wonder you previously. It's my fault. I'm really sorry to have troubled you. But don't worry, I definitely won't tell anyone else about this. Otherwise, I'll go to hell and have my tongue pulled out after I die." Chapter 346. He was the one who was fooled and should be apologized to, but he swore and swore that he was sorry. This man was really a gentleman. Ning Shu felt even more apologetic. She bowed again and said, "Huemore was naughty and immature. He fooled you. I apologize on his behalf." Tan Siwei smiled bitterly. He didn't expect that the one he was flirting with was not Ning Shu, but a man. What was even more ridiculous was that he was fooled. Every time Ning Shu acted coquettishly and wanted something from him, he secretly felt happy. This matter was simply a mess. "I'm too stupid. I didn't see it at all. I thought." Tan Siwei stopped halfway and waved his hand with a bitter smile. He picked up a file at random and flipped through it a few times. He gathered his courage again and said, "Shu, do you have someone in your heart?" Instinctively, A fairy-like figure floated in his mind. Just thinking about it made him feel sweet. Ning Shu had to tell the truth and said, "Yes." Tan Siwei's hand tightened. "Have you decided to marry each other?" "Not yet." Tan Siwei let out a long sigh. "Then, before you really make a decision, can you please let me continue to admire you? I know it's presumptuous, but I really can't control my heart. I'll try not to trouble you. If I've accidentally troubled you, just tell me. I'll stay away." His tone was so humble that Ning Shu felt even more guilty, shouting, "You don't have to be like this. There are so many good women in the world. You'll definitely meet someone 10,000 times better than me in the future." Tan Siwei laughed. "Back then, my mother said to my aunt, there are so many good men in the world. Why did you choose my uncle? My aunt said, if you don't like it, no matter how good the man is, it has nothing to do with you. If you like it, no matter how bad it is, it's the best in the world." His simple and sincere tone was as clean as the most transparent ice in the heart of the snow mountain. Ning Shu didn't dare to look into his eyes. A gentleman like Tan Siwei shouldn't be delayed by her. Giving him even the slightest bit of hope and keeping him hanging was an extremely despicable act. So she hardened her heart and said, "But I've already met the best." Tan Siwei's eyes darkened again. But this time, he didn't back down. "Please give me one more chance. Let me fight for it. Even if I can't, I'll be worthy of myself." Ning Shu didn't know how to respond to such a determined Tan Siwei, shouting, "Lady Ning! Found it. Xue Hongyi's dossier is here." On the other side of the room, a deputy suddenly shouted excitedly. Ning Shu and Tan Siwei looked at each other and immediately jogged over. After more than 20 years, the file was completely yellow and brittle. When it was slowly opened, one could almost hear the sound of the warp and weft of the paper breaking, and the content recorded in it finally appeared in front of Ning Shu after crossing the river of time. After reading it word by word, Ning Shu's expression gradually became serious. She raised her head and saw Tan Siwei's expression of astonishment. Here's the reason why His Majesty punished her family. Someone intercepted a secret letter written by her father, Xue Hujiao, in collusion with the enemy's general. It was delivered to His Majesty through the hands of the Zhu family of the loyal and brave Marquis. That enemy's general was the envoy who later rose to prominence in southern Yang and died on the roof of Xuanfang Terrace 2 days ago. Chapter 347. It's impossible for Xue Hujiao to collude with a foreign country. Hearing what was recorded in the file, Xiahou Qing immediately denied. The Xue family has been a general for generations, guarding the country. Their hands are stained with the blood of many soldiers of the southern Yang kingdom. Everyone in the southern Yang kingdom will change their faces when they hear about Xue Hujiao. They can't wait to eat the bones and drink the blood of the Xue family. With such a deep hatred, it's impossible for the Xue family to collude with the southern Yang kingdom. Moreover, the ancestors of the Xue family were the founding ministers of the country. The great ancestor emperor bestowed them with an iron certificate, and the general's mansion was hereditary. The glory of the Xue family has reached the highest level. There's no benefit in colluding with the southern Yang kingdom. Unless he was bewitched and lost his mind, he would never make such a stupid decision. Ning Shu also felt the same way. Therefore, the biggest possibility is that the envoy set up a vicious trap back then. He used a forged secret letter and borrowed the hands of our great Yu people to kill our most outstanding general. In the end, he led his southern Yang soldiers to victory. And the Xue family was charged with treason. Their whole family was overthrown, and their reputation was spurned for 100 years. Hui Mo couldn't understand it at all. Even I found something wrong with such a simple scheme. Why didn't anyone notice it at that time? First, the person who presented the secret letter was not someone else, but the Zhu family, the loyal and brave Marquis, who had been friends with the Xue family for many years and had arranged marriage. Such an act of placing righteousness before family unknowingly increased the persuasiveness. Second, Ning Shu finished the first one, and the second one was silent. The saying that one's achievements would shake the ruler was a cliché that could be ground out of one's ears. However, it was an absurd play that happened in every dynasty. Especially more than 20 years ago, The Shui family was a firm supporter of the former crown prince. Even if the emperor succeeded the throne, he was questioned by General Shui about the death of the former crown prince. Such an upright person seemed to be doomed to die in the treacherous imperial court. And the forged secret letter of the envoy took the initiative to hand the emperor a knife to eliminate dissidents. How could he not kill them? Ning Shu's heart thumps. She suddenly feels sad. Since the Shui family may die because of this, what about her, Duke Ning? Although on the surface, it seemed that His Majesty had treated her mother and Duke Ning very well after ascending the throne, how could a ruler's heart be at ease? Especially in the past 2 years, His Majesty's attitude had clearly changed. For example, the Empress had received His Majesty's order to kill her. If she hadn't tried her best to persuade the Empress, her head would have fallen to the ground. And would she be the first spark that would be followed by an even more violent tongue of fire that would burn her and Duke Ning into ashes? Her heart jerked violently as a huge sense of fear rose in her heart. Father, mother, Jia. What to do? What should she do now? Beside her, Tan Siwei noticed that something was wrong with her expression and asked with concern, Shu what's wrong? Why is your face so pale? Separating herself from the suffocating sense of fear, Ning Shu smiled to cover it up. It's nothing. Maybe I'm hungry after running for a day. I heard that the cooks in the Dali temple are good at cooking, especially the lotus root meat pancake. Shaoqing, shouldn't you take it out and let me have a taste? Tan Siwei didn't doubt her. He quickly ordered the kitchen to prepare food and asked people to send some prepared pastries to fill their stomachs. Don't bother. I've already prepared it here. Xiaoqing raised his chin to Ju Sai. Ju Sai immediately took out the food box that the bodyguard had sent over. After opening it, there were 8 kinds of fruit plates and 12 kinds of pastries. Just looking at them, it was enough to make people drool. Hui Mo's eyes lit up first. He couldn't wait to reach out his hands. Wow, these are all my favorite foods. You must know that I'm tired from running around today. You really love me. Ouch. He reached out and was about to pick up a piece when Ju Sai secretly kicked him in the knee. He turned his head and glared at Ju Sai accusingly. But when he met Ju Sai's oppressive eyes, he cowered. He lowered his head and pursed his lips. Let's talk nicely. Lady Ning, please go first. This is specially prepared for you. I'll eat the rest after you finish it. Running to the pigsty in the day and being kicked at night. Sob, sob, sob. Why did he bully him no matter what he did? There was no justice. Chapter 348. Amused by his aggrieved expression, Ning Shu felt relieved. She picked up a piece and stuffed it into his mouth. Don't act pitiful. Eat it quickly. When the food was in his mouth, Hui Mo immediately smiled and curved his eyebrows. Ning Shu also picked up a piece and whispered to Xiaoqing, Thank you, Your Highness. The pastry was still warm. Obviously, it was sent here as soon as it was done. When she was looking for the files in the warehouse, he was outside thinking about everything for her. Listening to her soft and tender voice, Xiaoqing rubbed his fingers and scolded her with a smile, You're long-winded. Ning Shu's heart immediately floated with pleasure. She thought to herself, Xiaoqing already has such a devilish face and is so good at coaxing people. I can't let him fall into the hands of other girls. It's enough to let this male Deji harm me. It's decided, he. While eating the sweet pastry, Hui Mo frowned and thought, so, in fact, Shui Hongyi is the one who has the most motive to kill the envoy to avenge her family, right? After going around in circles for a long time, the one with the strongest motive turned back to the most unlikely female ghost. Even Xiaoqing felt a sense of absurdity in his heart. His bony knuckles rhythmically tapped on the armrest. How many descendants does the Shui family have? Tan Siwei opened the file and read it in order. Because of the great ancestor emperor's edict, General Shui was beheaded, General Mansion's family members were demoted to commoners, the rest of them were sent to slave status. Forced by the Zhu family, Shui Hongyi fell into the secular world. She had a younger brother who was 11 years old and a younger sister who was 5 years old. Mrs. Shui and her 2 younger sons settled in the wasteland in the suburbs of the capital and made a living by farming. Later, her younger sister died of an illness. Not long after, Mrs. Shui died of depression. Only her younger brother Shui Ran survived under the care of Shui Hongi. After that, Shui Hongi committed suicide. Shui Ran's whereabouts were unknown. Someone once said that they saw his body in the mountains and it was eaten clean by wild dogs. Hearing this, Huemore sighs again and again. Oh, the Shui family is really miserable. Tan Siwei said, General Shui had 2 trusted generals when he was alive. One died in battle. The one who survived is called Bai Hong. He is Zunfangtai Susu's father. After Tan Siwei finished reading, he continued, but Susu has a maidservant's testimony. When the envoy died, Susu stayed in the room and did not take a step out. Everyone fell into a brief silence. As the investigation deepened, wave after wave of people were forced into the situation and gradually walked into an unfathomable situation. And who else was connected to that invisible chain? No one knew. Ning Shu thought for a moment and said, I remember that Shui Hongi was once engaged to a scholar when she was alive. What was that scholar's name? Tan Siwei read the dossier from beginning to end again. Let me see. This dossier isn't finished. There should be another one. I'll go look for it in the storeroom tonight. I'll give it to you as soon as I find it. Ning Shu nodded and said to Huemore, You just went to inquire about the unknown person who knocked down Ju Xiong. Did you find anything? Speaking of that person, Huemore could not help but sigh. Don't mention it. I walked around the Western market and asked countless people. I even gave out my salary for a few months, but I didn't get anything. Only the old lady who sold embroidery nearby said that she seemed to have seen the scene. But the person kept his head down deliberately and it was dark. In the blink of an eye, the person disappeared into the crowd. She vaguely saw that the person was holding something shining with silver light in his left hand. She could only be sure that the person was a man wearing grey silk clothes. He was not fat. Left hand. Using a knife to quickly cut a strip of cloth from Ju Xiong's body requires a very precise strength and agile speed. This means that this person is very likely to be left-handed. If he can afford to wear silk clothes, his family should be well off. There was no trace of a flaw in the process. He quickly mixed into the crowd and hid in a corner. This means that he is very familiar with the terrain of the Western market. Either he often goes there, or he was prepared. Based on these few simple sentences, even Ning Shu could only extract so much useful information. Vague, too vague. This person, she really did not know whether to praise him for being resourceful or insidious. The sunset glow in the sky had disappeared. Thousands of stars shone quietly in the dark blue sky. The stars were connected to form 28 constellations, mysterious and dreamy. It was as beautiful as a poet's dream after drinking. But no matter how beautiful the dream was, the second day of the 5-day period came to an end. Chapter 349. Today, everyone was exhausted. If they continued, it would only be a waste of effort. So, they went back to rest first and gathered again the next morning. Before returning to the mansion, Hui Mo walked to Ning Shu and put on a big smile. Lady Ning, I want to discuss something with you. Can you reimburse me for the money I gave out? What do you think? Ning Shu raised her eyebrows and said deliberately. Hui Mo said pitifully, I'm just a little guard. My monthly salary is only a few taels of silver. I saved that money for a long time. Do you have the heart to see me starving? Ning Shu spread out her hands and said shamelessly, I only asked you to inquire about the news. I didn't ask you to use money. How can you blame it on me? Hui Mo said angrily, Oh my God. Your Highness, look at her. Look at her. Woo woo, I don't want to live anymore. He originally wanted to ask Xiahou Qing to help him. But he didn't expect that his shizzy didn't stand on his side. Instead, he helped the Avildor and said, You've gained a lot of weight in prison. It's good for you to drink some northwest wind. It's also good for you to remember. Hui Mo immediately covered his chest with his hands, as if he was about to cry. His heart was broken into pieces. On the way back, Xiahou Qing said, Do you think the murderer is Susu? Ning Shu calmed down and said slowly, According to the current situation, among the people who attended the banquet that night, the possibility of Susu killing is very high. And no one is more convenient than her to do it. First, after several days of getting along, she was very familiar with the envoy's habits and temperament. Moreover, they had several intimate contact. The envoy was almost unguarded against her. No one is more convenient than her to kill. Second, according to the testimony of fourth young master Jiang, the envoy and Susu were sitting next to him that night. It was just a feint to put the aphrodisiac in his wine. Fourth young master Jiang's passionate noises were used to cover the sound of the secret passage opening and closing. At the same time, the weak cry for help that the envoy may have made before he died was completely covered. Third, the motive for the murder. Her father's generation was a retainer of the Shui family, a trusted aide who had sworn loyalty to the death. It was reasonable for her to avenge her master. Apart from this, if it weren't for the envoys, her father wouldn't have been implicated by the Shui family and become half dead. She wouldn't have been reduced to dust and live a life worse than death. His hatred overlaps, and his killing intent is obvious. Xiahou Qing heard the unfinished meaning in her words. But you still have doubts. That's right. Ning Xu nodded as Hao Ren had guessed her thoughts. There are still a few things that I can't figure out. Putting aside the credibility of the maidservant's testimony, Bai Susu is just an ordinary girl in Shi City. She's not even a top courtesan. Where did she get the fragrant bone softening powder, a poison that ordinary people can't possibly come into contact with? If she had this poison in her hands, how could her father be paralyzed in bed? Also, if she killed someone, why didn't she choose someone else but Li Yi and Zhu Yang as scapegoats? There shouldn't be any enmity between them. Xiahou Qing gave her a new message. By the way, I ordered someone to secretly investigate the Li family during the day and found a few unfinished sachets in her house. This sachet is very similar to the one that Forsythia sent from prison. It's very similar to the one that Bai Susu always carries with her. Especially the way it's tied is almost exactly the same. Ning Xu was shocked. Bai Susu and Li Yi's relationship is not ordinary. They exchange sachets. It's very likely that they are friends. Her eyes flashed with deep surprise, and then she frowned even more. But this is even more unreasonable. Li Yi was humiliated on the way back because she sent the jade hairpin flower to Susu that day. If they really have a personal relationship, Bai Susu, as a friend, should feel guilty. Why would she frame her friend? Chapter 350. Ning Xu dipped her hand in water and wrote down the suspicious points found in the case stroke by stroke. Her white fingertips left a string of transparent question marks on the table. The more she wrote, the more doubts she had, which made her even more confused. The first two cases had at least 10 days for her to slowly unravel the mystery, but this time, there were only 32 hours left in 5 days. She couldn't help but be nervous. If this case couldn't be solved on time, it didn't matter whether she was dead or alive, but would it become the fuse that directly destroyed her entire Duke's public house? The price was too high. She couldn't gamble, and she couldn't afford to gamble. A hand reached over and grasped her fingers that kept moving. The owner of the hand said, "Don't think about it for the time being. Tomorrow morning, Shi Yang and Tian Wen should have some results. Before that, let go of your brain first." Juicy said that the sunset was beautiful today, so the moon should be good tonight. "Take a look for me." That hand belonged to Xiahou Qing. As soon as it grasped her fingertips, it was like the 5 fingers of a zither player gently waving. It tickled her heartstrings. A little bit of sweetness, a little bit of sourness, a little bit of numbness. It made half of her heart melt, and the other half restless for no reason. Her brain calmed down invisibly, as if it found a golden bell for her wandering heart. Feeling the warmth from his palm, Ning Xu closed her eyes and exhaled softly. When she opened her eyes again, she smiled and said, "Okay." She raised her left hand to lift the corner of the curtain and looked out. She gazed at the bright moon that was like a plate after the thin clouds had dispersed. The stars twinkled faintly. The wind swept across 90,000 li, blowing into the dense treetops and also into the carriage, brushing against her and his body. Her eyes were like a mirror, reflecting the clear moon in the sky. She was afraid to disturb the tranquility of the moon, so she whispered, "The moon is really good tonight." The silver light is like a wash, and the stars are drunk. Is it? It's really beautiful. Millimeter, they didn't talk anymore. One quietly admired the moon, and the other admired the heartbeat under his palm. No one moved. The white brilliance of the moon silently poured on their intertwined hands, as if it should grow together. As usual, the carriage stopped in front of Duke Ning. Ning Shu thought for a moment before getting off the carriage and asked, "Has your highness ever coaxed other girls like this before?" When Xiahou Qing heard this, he raised his eyebrows and said with interest, "Of course there is." The jealousy in Ning Shu's heart suddenly overflowed. She questioned, "Who is it?" The corners of Xiahou Qing's mouth curled up slightly. "The youngest daughter of the wet nurse in the residence, she's only 4 years old." Ning Shu blushed slightly after drinking a mouthful of vinegar for no reason. Fortunately, her face was naturally as thick as a city wall. She didn't mind and instead said domineeringly, "Then you're not allowed to do that in the future, even if it's a little girl." Xiahou Qing's finger was propped on the side of his forehead. Finally, a rare smile appeared on his lips. It was like a strong wine that could make people drown in it with just a glance. He said in a flirtatious manner, "Okay." This one word made Ning Shu dizzy for a long time. It wasn't until the carriage of the Duke of Nanping's residence was far away that she realized that she couldn't hide the smitten smile on her face. She hurriedly covered her cheeks with her hands and forced herself to pull back the restraint that she had run thousands of miles away. She stuck out her tongue and turned to walk back to the gate with a smile. Just as she was about to step through the gate, a figure suddenly turned out from behind the dense shadows of the trees on the opposite side of the road and let out a cold laugh. Ning Shu immediately turned back in alarm. That person held the tree with one hand and a wine pot with the other. He slowly walked into her sight from the dense shadows. His eyes were red, filled with ridicule and anger. "You can't even recognize my voice. Shu, you really have a cold heart. Xiao Yuni." Chapter 351. Time was really a hand that flipped the clouds and rain. She had unknowingly changed her appearance. Now that she saw Xiao Yuni again, she actually sighed as if a lifetime had passed. She sighed that the person who had once been unforgettable to her, whom she could not forget for 7 lifetimes, had become so distant under the influence of time, as if they were just travelers who had coincidentally taken the same boat to cross the river. Now that they had finally crossed the river, she had completely let go. Smelling the strong smell of alcohol on him, Ning Shu glanced at him and curtsied slightly, saying politely, "Your Highness, drinking too much is harmful to the body." Tonight, Xiao Yuni's handsome face was unusually dispirited, as if he had been deeply hurt by something. He walked in front of her unsteadily, and under the bright moonlight, he stared deeply at the knot in her heart that could never be untied. "Yes, drinking too much is harmful to the body, ha ha," he laughed, his eyes full of ridicule. "What a polite sentence. Do you still remember what you said when I got drunk for the first time?" It was the Empress Dowager's birthday, and in order to liven things up for father and the Empress Dowager, I drank too much at once. After the banquet, I almost fell into the pool. After you found out, you were so angry that you wanted to hit me and even threatened me that if I drank so much again, you would never talk to me again. After that, I didn't dare to drink so much anymore. No matter how many people persuaded me, I only drank a little because I was afraid that you would really lose your temper and ignore me. But now that I've really drunk too much, you won't ignore me anymore. Instead, you just politely said that drinking too much is harmful to the body. It's ridiculous." The wine pot in his hand smashed into the corner of the wall with a bang, and the broken pieces splashed everywhere, just like his broken heart. Ning Shu instinctively took half a step back, avoiding the broken pieces. "Your Highness, you're drunk and should go back to rest. I'd better send someone to escort you back to the prince's residence." As she spoke, she turned around to call for the servants, but a scorching hand pulled her back from behind. The owner of the hand had a pair of bloodshot eyes as he unwillingly questioned her, "You want to run when you see me? Didn't you smile at Xiahou Qing just now? Why is it that when you're facing me, you don't even know how to curve your lips and brows? And the further away from me the better. Shu, have you forgotten? In the past, you would only smile at me like that. Now, you've given that smile to other men, to Qi Huaijin, to Cloudleaf, to Tan Siwei, who you just got engaged to. Oh right, and to Xiahou Qing. But not me. Why? You tell me why. Ningxu frowned and said, Sixth Highness, you're really drunk. Please let go of me. You're hurting me. Xiao Yuni's eyes were filled with complexity and pain. I'm not drunk. I'm more awake than ever today. A few days ago when you were in prison, I went to see you. You might not know this, but after you said those heartless words to me, I secretly instructed the officials of the Ministry of Justice to continue with the execution. As long as they don't beat you to death or cripple you, it's fine until you admit your mistake. I thought that I could really harden my heart and teach you a lesson. I would break your wings and let you have a taste of the sufferings of the world. In the end, you would obediently return to my side and be a sparrow in my cage that doesn't need to experience the hardships of the world. I thought I could. But I failed. On the third day after that day, I finally couldn't endure the torment in my heart. I ran to Father's side palace and knelt for 5 days. I knelt until my knees were almost crippled before I finally begged him to be soft-hearted and forgive your punishment. He also agreed to let you out in half a month. Including yesterday, it wasn't that I didn't want to speak up for you, but because of my leg injury, by the time I rushed to Funning Palace, the dust had already settled. I couldn't even catch up with your back. Look, I've lost to you once again. From that day 11 years ago, I was destined to lose to you. I was willing to endure it. But why did you run away halfway? Chapter 352. The Sixth Prince, Xiao Yuni. His temperament was calm and cold, his methods were harsh, and his shrewdness was hard to fathom. This was the evaluation that most of the courtiers secretly had of him. This person could abandon his mother to climb up the social ladder, but he could also break his teeth and swallow his blood in order to achieve his own goals. This kind of temperament was simply a copy of Jin Sheng's in the past. When people saw him, they couldn't help but praise and respect him, respect and fear him. But tonight, such an arrogant prince's red eyes were filled with unbearable pain and entanglement, making people feel a little sorry for him. Looking into his eyes, looking into the whirlpool that carried countless memories of their past, Ningxu couldn't help but be slightly stunned. The person in front of her had once filled her entire charming teenage years, changing her entire life, 7 lifetimes, and 7 lifetimes. He was a nail in her bones, a brand that she was destined to be unable to cut off, making her who she was now. 300 years was not a blink of an eye. Before she met Xiahou Qing, her temperament, her way of dealing with people, and even her intense hatred and resentment, her love for him, her inability to get what she wanted, and so on had all been imperceptibly influenced by him. If she hadn't met him, perhaps she wouldn't be who she was now. She could never deny this. A slight sourness came to the tip of her nose, a moment of silence for the past. Ningxu turned her head away and said softly, In the past, I was young and ignorant, saying a lot of nonsense and doing a lot of foolish things that crossed the line, causing your highness to misunderstand. The past is like a flower that has left its petals, melting snow. No matter how beautiful it is, it can't be chased. Your highness, we've both grown up. Why don't we each look forward? Xiao Yuni's eyes turned even redder. Look forward. You can look forward, but I'm still standing alone in the same place. How do you want me to look forward? Ningxu, I want you to speak the truth today. Can you deny that you loved me? Faced with his question, she took a silent breath and turned back to look at him. She nodded. I admit that I once admired you. Under the moonlight, she let out a soft sigh, like a drop of dew falling into the soil along the veins of a leaf, mixed with a touch of sadness. But that's all because I was young and frivolous, self-righteous when I didn't know my limits. In fact, we've never been the same kind of people. You have your open road, I have my single-plank bridge. What I yearn for is a simple and ordinary life, where we help each other in times of need, where 2 inches of fine black hair will turn white together. You, on the other hand, are destined to walk a glorious path to the top. The path was too narrow for 2 people to walk on. Even if you and I were to forcefully hold hands, one of us was destined to fall into the endless abyss. Since that's the case, why don't we part ways here? That way, we can be considered to have completed our past relationship. At least it won't be a complete mess, and in the end, it will only be filled with disgust. Xiao Yunyi's heart turned cold, as if a knife had pierced through his chest. That knife had left after stabbing him, leaving him with a large bloody hole. A gust of wind blew past him, making his limbs turn cold from the pain. His Adam's apple bobbed hard, as he glared at Ning Shu angrily. Ning Shu was touched by that gaze, and broke free from his grip. She turned to leave, but he pulled her into his arms with even more strength. Behind her, right by her ear, he growled hoarsely, "What did I do wrong? Just because I'm not willing to give up fighting for that position for you. Do you know, even if I'm willing to give up, I'm already standing in such a position, standing halfway up the mountain. Even if I want to turn back, there's no way for me to go. Shu, why can't you think for me? Do you think Imperial Mother will leave behind a useless prince? There's still 8th Royal Brother, 12th Royal Brother, and 14th Royal Brother in the palace. They're still young, and they still have unlimited hope. If I'm useless, how can I live?" Chapter 353. He hugged her tightly in his arms, his strength so strong that it was like he wanted to rub her into his bones and blood, never to be separated again. Perhaps the night wind was too strong, his voice seemed to have a trace of sadness. Shu, I'm begging you, give me another chance. No matter what mistakes I've unintentionally made you unhappy and made you hate me, I beg you to forgive me this once and give our childhood sweetheart another chance, okay? She couldn't break free, but fortunately, she stopped moving. After a long time, she said, "I had a very, very long dream. The dream spanned 300 years. You and I were lucky enough to meet each other in every life, but every life ended in tragedy. In the beginning, you seemed to like me and doted on me, but later on in every life, you threw me into the dust ruthlessly. That dream was so real, like it was our past and present lives. I gambled once, but I lost miserably. This time, I don't want to lose again." Xiao Yunyi's eyes trembled slightly. After a short moment of shock, he denied desperately, "The me in the dream was not me. Not to mention a dream, even if you did experience that kind of past life, can you blame me for what Xiao Yunyi did in the past life? Don't use my past life to measure my present life. It's not fair to me." He reached out his right hand resolutely, biting it with his sharp teeth. "I dare to use my life, my future, everything I have to cut my blood and swear to you, if I betray you in this life, let my soul be destroyed forever and never enter the cycle of reincarnation again. Shu, I dare to swear, do you dare to believe me?" Ning Shu shook her head slightly. "I don't dare." "Why?" Ning Shu looked up at the sky, as if looking through the mirror of the moon, looking at the other person who was shining with the moon. "There's no other way." Her voice was as light as water, heartless and gentle. "Because my heart is very small, only one person can live in it. Now, someone else is living in it." Xiao Yunyi was almost crazy. "Who? Is it Tan Siwei or someone else? Tell me who it is, I'll go and kill him now. You can't have anyone else in your heart, only me." "Xiaoho Qing," she said, "you can go and kill him. If you can take the risk of breaking with the Nanping mansion and losing the throne forever, you can go. But even if you kill him, my heart won't change back. What's done can't be undone." Weighing the pros and cons, His Highness the Sixth Prince has already remembered these principles since he was a few years old, isn't that so? His arms around her stiffened and cracked inch by inch. Xiao Yunyi endured the pain in his chest and sucked in a deep breath. Every word he said seemed to be filled with blood. "As expected, you're already completely on his side. For him, you can even threaten me like this. Shu, you really haven't changed at all. You're exactly the same as when you were young. Once you've decided on something, you won't change your mind." It was just that the target would never be him again. Walking out of his arms, Ning Shu turned and bowed deeply to him. "Thank you for your love, Your Highness the Sixth Prince, and thank you for taking care of me. Ning Shu can't repay you." The corner of her clothes fluttered in the wind, like a faint cloud that could never be touched, destined to slowly leave him and go further and further away. Xiao Yunyi staggered and watched her drift away. His voice was like the wind that was sifted into pieces by a sieve as he said softly, "You saved my life in the past, but I'm just returning it to you now. If the envoy's case is in trouble, I can still plead for you to father. You don't have to be so polite. Ning Shu thanked him again. Just after she said goodbye, she lifted her leg to enter the house. Behind her, Xiao Yuni's voice trailed over. Do you really not remember what day it is today? Ning Shu stopped in her tracks in surprise. You really forgot. Behind her, Xiao Yuni chuckled softly. In the past, I was raised by Yin Jiaoi. My mother and I had a low status and weren't loved by father. My mother was worried every day about whether she could live well in the harem, not to mention celebrating my birthday. Later, I was taken away by the Empress and was raised by her. I didn't lack anything and also had a decent birthday present. But in order to commemorate her eldest prince who died young, I've always celebrated a dead person's birthday. Since I was young, you were the only one who would secretly prepare a small gift for me on this day every year. Do you still remember the longevity noodles you made when you were 12? That was the first time you cooked for me. To be honest, it tasted terrible. You mistook sugar for salt and soy sauce for vinegar, so I ate a whole bowl of sweet and salty longevity noodles. But you don't know how happy I was. Not to mention the noodles, even if it was poison, I would eat it all. But you will never make a bowl of longevity noodles like that for me again, nor will you say happy birthday, Brother Yi softly beside my ear. Chapter 354. Ning Shu looked back at the person behind her from a distance that was neither close nor far. Looking at this young prince whose face was so familiar to her bones, a long string of memories flowed through her heart. But no matter how beautiful the memories were, the past was the past. She raised her head slightly and said sincerely to him, Your Highness, happy birthday. We'll part ways here. The gates of the Duke's estate creaked and completely isolated them, taking away the last piece of Ning Shu's fluttering clothes. It also completely took away those peach blossoms and spring breezes, as well as the years they spent together. Xiao Yuni stared at the red lacquered gates in a daze, a smile on his lips and tears in his eyes as he mocked himself. That year, she was 5 years old and he was 8. She saved his life outside Chengqian Palace. He said, You helped me once and I'll repay you with a lifetime. She said, Okay. My memory is very good. If you forget, I'll look for you. Later, she was 12 and he was 15. She cooked for the first time and scalded her tender fingers to cook a bowl of longevity noodles for him. His heart ached terribly, but he said in a disdainful tone, Don't enter the kitchen again next time. If you really leave a scar, be careful that no one will marry you in the future. She said, I'm not afraid. You swore when you were young that you would take care of me for a lifetime. If no one wants me, I'll stick to you. Don't even think about running away. Later, she was 15 and he was 18. He impatiently guarded her growth day by day. He waited sweetly and anxiously for so many years, waiting for the day she became an adult. He was full of anticipation as he rushed to the Duke's estate with a jade hairpin that he made himself, ready to put it on her head and let her stick to him for a lifetime. But she didn't care anymore. Xiao Yuni. You were indeed the one who was least needed since you were young. The young prince spread his fingers over his face and laughed. His laughter was full of mockery and unfairness, and his face was full of tears. Behind him, a eunuch ran over from afar and glanced at him with some fear. He whispered, Your Highness, let's hurry back. If the Empress finds out that you're still outside this late at night, and even discussing your birthday at Duke Ning's door, I'm afraid she won't be happy. Xiao Yuni turned back darkly. Ever since I was 8 years old, I've been doing everything according to what she wanted me to do. I've done everything that could satisfy her. I've been a template prince that could make her nod her head, but I've never been myself. Now, I can't even stand here for a while. The eunuch fell to his knees and said in fear, This servant doesn't dare. It's just that, Your Highness, you've spent 10 years of effort to build a dam of 1,000 miles. You've spent so much effort and swallowed so much bitterness that can't be shared with outsiders. This servant really doesn't want to see your many years of effort go down the drain. Since Lady Ning can no longer be saved, you should grab onto whatever you can. The darkness in his eyes gradually disappeared and Xiao Yuni looked up at the moon above him, closing his eyes for a long time. When he opened them again, his eyes had regained their usual clarity. He turned around expressionlessly and said in a low voice, "Let's go." The eunuch hurriedly got up and followed behind him. Yes. After serving Xiao Yuni into the carriage, the eunuch hesitated for a moment, but still took out something that he had been holding in his sleeve and presented it to Xiao Yuni. "Your Highness, this is a birthday gift that Zhao Yi specially prepared for you. Her Highness Zhao Yi specially found out that you like to collect wooden carvings and trinkets, so she specially found this wooden cicada among hundreds of items and ordered this servant to give it to you to wish you a happy birthday." Xiao Yuni's gaze landed on the wooden cicada. It was really an exquisite item. The wooden cicada's wings could be carved into the wood and it was really exquisite. However, Xiao Yuni only glanced at it before he flipped it over and threw the curtain down. "When I needed her the most, she didn't stand up for me. Why is she pretending now? Take it and tell her, I don't need it anymore. From now on, I, Xiao Yuni, will not have a birthday." Chapter 355. No matter how many people couldn't sleep that night, how many people were entangled by the past, and how many people cut off the past and looked forward, the third day of the 5-day period had arrived. Ning Shu didn't sleep well that night. When she got up in the morning, her temples suddenly hurt. She didn't feel better until she splashed cold water on her face. Fortunately, Tianwen brought some news about Susu early in the morning, which helped her calm down. Tianwen was worthy of being the reincarnation of a gossiper. In just one night, he knew the situation of Susu's family clearly. He even knew when Susu stopped breastfeeding, when her teeth changed, and when her menstrual cycle started. Although she didn't know what was the use of him asking about these things, she respected his personal hobby. From this overly detailed information, Ning Shu obtained a few useful pieces of information. First, Susu's parents were injured and disabled. They were bedridden all year round, which required a lot of money. Even if Susu sold her brothel, she could barely cover the expenses. She often couldn't make ends meet. But since last June, her parents suddenly miraculously improved. According to the neighbors, during that time, a man dressed as a doctor came in and out of her house every day. Second, since Susu entered the brothel, she couldn't control herself and rarely went home. However, last August, when her father was barely able to walk, Susu came back. The person who brought her back was a very young man. He looked like he was wearing brocade clothes. They all thought that Susu had curried favor with some high-ranking official in the brothel and saved the lives of her parents. Third, someone had seen Li Yi come in and out of Susu's house more than once. Every time she came, she would carry a basket of small things or snacks. Just these 3 points were enough to give Ning Shu a pleasant surprise. Ning Shu said, "Did anyone see what the young man looked like?" Tianwen said, "No, it was late at night when Susu went back to the Bai family. The neighbor went out to pour the night incense and happened to see him. The young man seemed to deliberately hide his identity and covered himself with a cloak. But from his back, he should be a well-educated young man. Was he tall? Or did he have any other characteristics? It was too long and the night was dark. The neighbor couldn't remember how tall he was. As for the special characteristic, it seems that the young master pushed open the Bai clan's door with his left hand. Does that count?" Ning Shu's fingertips tapped lightly on the table. Normal people who are right-hand will subconsciously use their right hand no matter if it's carrying something or opening a door or window. However, those who are left-handed will do the opposite. Could this person be the one who cut Ju Xiong's clothes? Ning Shu pondered for a moment and made a decision. Li Yi has visited Susu's family several times. They must have a close relationship. However, we still need to find out how the two of them met and whether they had any conflicts. Follow me to the Supreme Court to interrogate by Susu. I think we'll be able to find out a lot today. Ning Shu hastily ate a few snacks and immediately jumped onto the horse's back. Early in the morning, the capital had just woken up from a night of deep sleep. The stall owner who made breakfast secretly yawned while cooking hot wontons. The 2 horses had already sped away. Ouch, the wonton I just cooked is covered in dust. Ning Shu looked back from afar. I'm sorry, stall owner. I'll compensate you later. When I'm free, I'll go to your house to eat 10 bowls. The stall owner waved from afar. Lady Ning, there's no need for that. You've worked hard on the envoy's case. When the case is solved, I'll treat you to a meal for free. Okay, go. Ning Shu smiled and shouted. She retracted her gaze and resolutely moved forward. She rode the horse to the Supreme Court at the fastest speed possible. She got off the horse and went straight in. After the greeting, Ning Shu did not have time to be polite. She went straight to the point. Tan Shaoqing, have you found the second file related to Shuehongyi? Oh, I found it, Tan Siwei said. It seemed that he had been searching for a long time. His face was full of fatigue, and his eyes were obvious. His speech was a little sluggish. He forced himself to focus and said, but the file has been here for too long. Some parts are brittle, and it's even been eaten by worms. Thank you, Shaoqing. Ning Shu took the file and opened it. Her eyes quickly scanned through it. Just as she was about to search for the most important information, she suddenly realized that the part where the scholar's name was recorded was coincidentally damaged. How did this happen? Tan Siwei lowered his eyes tiredly and shook his head. When I found it last night, it was already like this. I must have missed this part when I was sorting out the files. As a result, I couldn't keep it properly. I searched the shelves with a few other officials for a long time, but we couldn't find any fragments. It's probably gone. Chapter 356. Her luck was so bad. Ning Shu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed like the heavens still favored her as usual. Tan Siwei looked guilty. Anyway, it's the Supreme Court's fault for not supervising you properly. I'm sorry. His words made Ning Shu feel even more embarrassed. She put away the damaged file and bowed. Shaoqing, you can't do that. I'm the one who should feel guilty for troubling you to search for so long last night. Shaoqing, you must have stayed up all night. Go and rest. Leave the rest to me. Tan Siwei waved his hand. It's okay. Staying up late to investigate cases is normal. As a woman, you didn't complain about being tired after running around for days. I'm a man. How can I be so spoiled? You're going to interrogate Bai Susu next, right? I'll go with you. Ning Shu had no reason to refuse Tan Siwei's insistence. After a while, Bai Susu was escorted to the main hall by the officers. This time, Ning Shu sat at the front of the hall. She had learned from Xiaoho Qing how to ignore people. She tapped her fingers rhythmically on the table as she slowly sipped the tea in front of her. Only when Bai Susu's heart skipped a beat did Ning Shu open her eyes slowly. She looked at Bai Susu with her cold eyes and said, Bai Susu, do you have anything else to say to us about the case of the envoy's sudden death? She was used to being called Miss Susu at Xuanfeng Station. When her distant surname was pointed out, her slender and watery eyelashes clearly trembled. She lowered her head and said, I have already told you everything I know the day before yesterday. This case really has nothing to do with me. I don't know anything about how the envoy died. Why don't you tell us how you met Li Yi and what your relationship is like? Ning Shu was not in a hurry. Bai Susu clenched her fists and clenched her teeth. I don't know her that well, but I've heard from my friends in Shi City that the flowers she sells are very fresh, and she has everything. That's why I occasionally buy some from her. Other than that, I don't really know her. Oh right, there was one time when my parents were seriously ill and I couldn't leave the building. At that time, she happened to deliver flowers to the building, so I asked her to come to my house to check on the situation. However, I also paid her to run errands. Other than those few business deals, I have no other selfless dealings. Don't you have a servant girl? Why did you ask an unfamiliar flower girl to visit your parents? Miss, you don't know. Although our brothel alleys seem to be filled with dragons and snakes, there are actually more rules than those outside. Qiao is my maidservant, but she has signed an irrevocable contract with the brothel. Normally, she can't leave the brothel without a reason. I thought that rather than making mother unhappy, it would be better to spend some money to hire someone else. It would save us from unnecessary quarrels. She reacted so quickly, as if she had already guessed that Ning Shu would find out about this, so she made preparations in advance. Is that so? Ning Shu sneered, and her eyes turned sharp. Then what grudge do you have with her that you want to kill her? Do you know that after leaving the Supreme Court yesterday, she left a bloody letter and hanged herself? What? Bai Susu was caught off guard by this piece of news. She gasped in shock and widened her eyes in disbelief. She asked anxiously, how could that be? How is she now? Is she all right? Ning Shu's gaze fell on her unblinkingly. It's all thanks to her mother that she discovered it in time. Otherwise, she would have already breathed her last. Right now, she's still lying in the clinic, and it's unknown whether she's dead or alive. The doctor said that whether she can survive or not depends on her luck. Why? Didn't you say that you were just friends with her? Why are you so worried about her? Chapter 357. Susu clenched her fists and lowered her eyes. I'm a firm believer in Buddhism. Even if I happen to see an ant being crushed to death, I should feel pity for it, not to mention a living human life. Besides, I heard that she got into trouble on her way back because she was sending the jade hairpin flower to me that day. I'm also worried about it. Ning Shu said, how did you know about her accident? Susu said in a low voice, the West Market is only so big. Any gossip will spread in half a day. I live in this birdcage every day. Even if I don't want to ask, I will hear about it. It seems that you two are really not close. Ning Shu nodded in understanding. A suicide note written in blood hit her face. Then why did she write that she was ashamed of my friend Susu in her suicide note? The blood that had seeped through the back of the paper seemed to have just spurted out from the blood vessels. The thick stench of blood caused her eyes to tremble. Bai Susu clutched the suicide note in her hands, and her lips trembled uncontrollably. She unfolded the will and read it word by word. Tears almost gushed out of her eyes, but when she saw the handwriting clearly, she was suddenly stunned and instinctively refuted. This isn't Er's handwriting. Yes, indeed, Ning Shu's lips curled up as she admitted shamelessly. Bai Susu was stunned. She said slowly and lightly, I forged this suicide note to trick you. I didn't use Li Er's blood, but chicken blood. After saying that, Ning Shu's eyes turned sharp, but you've already shown your true colors, haven't you? You said that you didn't know Li Er well. How did you know her handwriting? Don't say that you met her by chance. In order to imitate her handwriting, I deliberately found Li Er's letters and compared them. There are at least 50 to 60% similarities. If you're not close to her, you can't tell the difference at a glance. Besides, your subconscious emotions and the tears in your eyes have completely betrayed you. Bai Susu, tell me the truth. What are you trying to hide? Her fingers were trembling, and her lips were turning pale. Bai Susu bit her lips. After a long time, under Ning Shu's sharp gaze, she took a deep breath and began to tell the truth. Indeed, Er and I were once close friends. We met 5 years ago. At that time, my family was in dire straits. We couldn't even gather enough money to buy half of the medicine for my parents. At the age of 14, I sold some of my own sewing needlework in Shui City to eke out a living. It was there that I met the 11-year-old who had been kicked out by her father to sell flowers. She was a good girl. I could not bring myself to set up a stall in the beginning, and often I could not even sell a pair of soles in the evening. It was who carried her little basket of flowers and shouted loudly for me along the street. Although the circumstances of our families were different, in the end, we were in the same boat, so we gradually became the best of sisters. She knew that my parents were seriously ill and needed money. She often risked being scolded and beaten by her father to secretly give me some copper coins. I am very grateful. However, a cup of water cannot save a burning cart. Later, my parents' illness could not be delayed any longer, so I had no choice but to sell myself to the brothel. A brothel is not a place for a good girl. Wanted to visit me many times, but I rejected her flatly. It was because of this that I gradually lost contact with her. Before I entered the brothel, I only begged her for one thing. Visit my parents occasionally when she was free. Not only did she agree, but she also did a good job. She often brought food to them and talked to them to express her comfort. To be honest, I have to thank her for this. Even if I am to be her slave in the next life, it will be worth it. No wonder Li Yi hurriedly sent by Susu the other day when she heard that she needed the jade hairpin flower. Ning Shu nodded and said, if that's the case, why did you pretend that you were not familiar with her? Bai Susu's snow-white and thin oval face sank. She suddenly sneered, it's just that I didn't expect that such a good girl would snatch away the person I love the most. Do you know that Ju Yang, who is about to be married to her, was once my childhood sweetheart? I am not an unreasonable person. I know that once I entered the fire pit, I was no longer qualified to be with Big Brother Ju. As for Big Brother Ju's future wife, I was envious and jealous, but I also wished her well. However, that person could be anyone. Why did it have to be her? She is my best sister. She clearly knew that he was the one I loved, the one I couldn't let go of, the one thing I couldn't let go of. Before I entered the brothel, I cried for several days and nights, telling her about my feelings for Big Brother Ju and my reluctance to leave him. If I did not introduce him, they would not have known each other at all. However, I did not expect that after I entered the fire pit, the person I cared about the most would be together behind my back. I only knew about it when they were engaged. Lady Ning, what do you think this is? Is this not betrayal? Chapter 358. Bai Susu began to sob. Her tears were filled with complicated emotions. There were deep sisterly love, endless jealousy, and many other feelings. As a woman herself, it was not hard for Ning Shu to understand her feelings. The more someone cared about them, the harder it would be for them to bear even a little bit of deception. For Susu, fate was already so unfair. Coupled with Ju Yang and Li Yi's double concealment, how could she bear it when she suddenly found out? Ning Shu slowed down and said, so you want to take revenge on them? Bai Susu denied, I didn't do it. Although I hold a grudge against them, I'm not that vicious. Since you've found out about me, you must already know about my background. There's no need for me to hide it anymore. The source of my family's tragedy can be said to be that bastard. I did want to kill him. That night, I even prepared the golden hairpin to stab him to death. I wanted to kill him when he wasn't paying attention. But that bastard was too alert. He noticed that I put my hand under the pillow and slapped me. He even kicked me a few times before pushing the door open and leaving. Since he sensed your intention to kill, why didn't he send someone to arrest you? Because I secretly added some drugs to his wine. After drinking it, he became delirious. After he left my room, I was very nervous. I was afraid that he would bring people in to kill me at any time. I thought that when the effects of the drug wore off, it would be the time of my death. I spent the whole night in fear. I didn't expect to hear that he was the first to be killed the next morning. Ning Shu's heart skipped a beat. So the bone-softening powder in his wine was added by you? Bai Susu's expression was particularly blank. What bone-softening powder? I added a knockout drug, the most common kind. Sometimes, there will be some difficult guests in the brothel. In order to protect ourselves, we will prepare some. You can ask the sisters in the brothel. As for the bone-softening powder, isn't it a rare thing that only exists in the legends? How can a lowly brothel worker like me get it? Ning Shu asked, when the envoy left your room, didn't you follow him to take a look? Susu said, when the matter was exposed, I was scared out of my wits. I thought my death was certain, so I didn't have the courage to follow. Ning Shu's eyes turned. Then when Ju Yang went upstairs that night, did you notice anything unusual about him? Susu's face was full of bitterness. At that time, I was thinking that the envoy was about to return. That was my last chance to kill him, so I definitely couldn't miss it. When Ju Yang came up, I didn't notice it at first. It was only when eldest young Master Tan ordered him to withdraw that I noticed it was him. What did you do after that? At that time, I had already heard that something had happened to Yi. I saw that there was something wrong with his eyes and had a premonition in my heart. I guessed that he might want to take revenge. Although he and Yi betrayed me, but Yi also suffered such a thing, and the resentment in my heart also disappeared. As for me, I still couldn't bear to part with him. Anyway, I was going to die, so I didn't want to see them being lovey-dovey on the road to the netherworld. So I used the excuse of tidying up my makeup to chase after him and persuade him. I thought I had already dispelled his thoughts, but I didn't expect that he still insisted on doing it. After hearing this, Ning Shu briefly fell into thought. Looking at the thin but resilient woman kneeling in front of her, she pursed her lips and reminded her, "Other than that, do you have anything else to say? Let me remind you, if you still insist on hiding something, according to the law, you will be exiled outside the pass and will not be able to enter the capital for generations. At that time, your parents will really be dead." "I know." Susu lowered her teary eyes and answered with difficulty. She twisted her fingers and thought for a long time. Suddenly, she said, "I remember. That night, after the envoy left my room, because he was afraid of me, I collapsed on the ground. Through the door, I faintly heard him say, 'It's you.'" Chapter 359. This "it's you," which pot is it referring to? Shi Yang and Hui Mo squatted on the ground, one on the left and one on the right. Ning Shu lowered her head and said, "I don't know." According to Susu, she didn't have time to open the door to see. She only vaguely heard the words and then the footsteps of the envoy went away. At that time, Susu just had bad intentions, so the envoy was more vigilant than usual. What's more, he didn't say "it's you" or "what are you doing here?" Instead, he said "it's you." With such a tone, either the other party is deeply trusted by the envoy, or the envoy doesn't think the other party is a threat at all. Shi Yang turned the wooden stick in his hand and said, "Didn't her maid see anything when she went upstairs?" It was almost midnight when the envoy came out of her room. About 15 minutes later, her maidservant was waiting outside the door with a basin of water. When she heard Susu crying inside, she went in. At midnight, all the lights on the 3rd floor went out. Both the master and maidservant thought the envoy had left. They didn't expect him to die on the balcony not far away. Shi Yang turned it for a while and felt that it was hot. He quickly threw it to Hui Mo. Hui Mo glared at him with resentment. Since he couldn't win, he had to bear the burden without complaint. Tan Siwei said, "Did she tell you who the man in brocade clothes who sent her home last August was? Where did the money for her parents' treatment come from?" Ruan Chang'an, the fool. Ning Shu didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she mentioned the playboy who ruined the whole family by himself. Ruan Chang'an was obsessed with Susu last year. He spent all kinds of gold, silver, jewelry, ancient books, calligraphy and painting on her as if they didn't cost anything. The brothel keeper made a lot of money and promoted Susu to the position of one of the 4 pillars of the brothel. But Ruan Chang'an's novelty came and went quickly. Within 2 months, he changed to a new courtesan. Ruan Chang'an had been sent to the frontier a month ago. The case of the envoy had nothing to do with him. Hui Mo stared at the thing on the stick and asked curiously, "Do you think Susu is telling the truth this time? Could it be that he's still tricking us?" Ning Shu crossed her arms in front of her chest and said, "I don't fully believe it. For now, we have to be cautious about what we say to each of them. However, I have a hunch that the possibility of an acquaintance committing the crime is very high." Hui Mo nodded. "Oh." Ning Shu raised her eyebrows and asked, "And then?" Hui Mo licked his lips and waved his hand. He continued to stare at the front attentively. "Wait a moment, it will be done soon." Shi Yang rubbed her hands and nodded repeatedly. The corner of Ning Shu's mouth twitched. She couldn't take it anymore and slapped both of them. "Wait for what? Wait for what? The case is already in full swing. We haven't found out what happened on the 7th of May yet. Instead of helping Heaven's Inquisition, you two are still in the mood to roast chicken? Do you want to die? Do you want to die?" Huemor held the chicken that was sacrificed for by Susu. He covered the back of his head and said with conviction, "Isn't it because I don't want to waste it? Since it's already been sacrificed, it would be a waste not to eat it." "Wait a minute. It was already cooked. Wait for us to eat it and then go immediately." Yes, it's already roasted. It's not too late to go after eating it." Shi Yang smiled flatteringly and was about to stuff the crispy and fragrant chicken wing into his mouth when Ning Shu snatched it away. Ning Shu raised the corner of her mouth and sneered. "Don't worry, I will be responsible for eating it up. I promise not to waste it at all. As for you two, if I count to 3 and you are still hanging around in front of me, Don't blame me for doing something terrible," she said, and pulled out a long iron rod from behind her. It was used by the Supreme Court for punishment. 1. 2. Hui Mo and Shi Yang's 4 eyes were wide open. Hui Mo and Shi Yang roared with grief and indignation. "Inhumane, Miss Ning, we will remember you." He ran out like a wisp of smoke. Finally, after dealing with the 2 naughty kids, Ning Shu threw the rod aside and happily tore off a fat chicken leg and gave it to Tan Siwei. Xiaoqing, try it. It seems to be cooked well. Tan Siwei seemed to be in a daze because of the fatigue from staying up late. When he heard Ning Shu calling him, he was flattered. "Okay. Thank you very much." He took the chicken leg and took small bites. He looked at Ning Shu's side profile and soon fell into a daze again. Chapter 360. Nanping Prince's Mansion. As soon as she sat down, Ning Shu unceremoniously gulped down a large cup of water. She put down the empty teacup and said to Xiaoqing, "So Li Yi's strange behavior that night can be explained." She went to kneel to the double-faced Buddha because she felt that she had stolen her sister's sweetheart and suffered retribution. So she went to the Buddha to repent and beg for forgiveness. But there's still one question I haven't figured out. I've checked the map and found that Li Yi's family lived in Kangping Square near Shui City. But she met the envoy in Shi City and was harassed by the envoy all the way. Finally, she was found in an alley near Kangping Square with disheveled clothes. It's reasonable to say that the distance between Shi City and Kangping Square isn't close. Didn't she meet anyone who helped her along the way? Even if the passers-by didn't want to meddle in other people's business, why didn't anyone find her when there were so many neighbors near Kangping Square? Xiaoqing casually threw a handkerchief to her and said, "I'm afraid we'll have to wait until the 7th of May for all the details to be solved." Ning Shu took the handkerchief and wiped the sweat off her forehead. She nodded and said, "Yes, now we just have to wait for news from Tianwen and the others. Everyone the envoy met after entering the capital is here." Ju Sai carried a large pile of files to Ning Shu. "How did your highness know I wanted these?" Ning Shu looked at the small mountain in front of her and couldn't hide her surprise. She had just stepped into Nanping Prince's mansion and mentioned to Xiaoqing that it might be an acquaintance who committed the crime. In the blink of an eye, Ju Sai had already brought the information she wanted. Ju Sai said, "The Shizi ordered us to prepare the information of everyone related to this case in advance, in case Miss Ning needs it." Ning Shu's eyes flashed and she looked at Xiaoqing. "What else is there?" she asked. Ju Sai said, "In the month since the envoy entered the capital, we've investigated who she met, where she visited, and what she did. Most of the information has been sent to the prince's mansion, but a small part is still being collected. As for Bai Susu's family background, it was Tianwen who reported it to the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince spent the night analyzing it before presenting it to Miss Ning." Xiaoqing frowned. "Juicy, you talk too much. Back off. I know my mistake." Ju Sai shut his mouth, admitted his mistake, and retreated. For the time being, only Ning Shu and Xiaoqing were left in the hall, along with the small mountain of files between them. Looking at Xiaoqing, who was dressed in a jade-green robe and had long black hair, Ning Shu took a light breath. Her eyes sparkled as she said softly, "Your Highness, you can't." After she finished speaking, she noticed that Xiaoqing's eyebrows moved slightly. Only then did she realize that her words were ambiguous. She hurriedly coughed lightly and said, "I didn't mean that Your Highness isn't good in that aspect. Ahem. What I meant was, Your Highness, you've done so many things in secret, yet you didn't say a single word. If I didn't happen to ask you today, I wouldn't have known." "This won't do," Xiaoqing said indifferently, "it's just a small matter. What's the point of mentioning it?" Ning Shu said seriously, "Who said it's a small matter? Perhaps it's nothing to those who don't care about it, but to those who care, even if it's really insignificant, it has a profound meaning. When you're thirsty, a drop of water can be a life-saving fountain. When you're exhausted, a thin branch handed over is also extremely important." Xiaoqing slowly twisted the bone in his palm. "Then, do you care?" His slightly raised tone seemed to have a small hook hidden in it. With a light hook, half of Ning Shu's soul was hooked away. The heat on her cheeks slowly rose. Ning Shu was unwilling to admit defeat. She forced herself to answer, of course. Xiahou Qing's face exuded a rare tenderness. He said slowly as if he was coaxing a child, "You can be fierce. I'll listen to you." Not good. The other half of Ning Shu's soul was so easily hooked away. She licked her lips and tried to suppress the itch in her heart. At the same time, she secretly said in her heart, wait until I safely celebrate my 17th birthday. That will be the day when I, Ning Shu, will subdue you. Tianwen, who was hiding behind the window and peeking, saw this and his eyes lit up. With a subverted expression, he awkwardly imitated Shi Yang's hometown dialect and said, "My dear mother, Shizi Yi is actually a para." He was still immersed in the gossip when a golden bead shot over like a gust of wind and hit his head, knocking him down from the window. He cried out in pain and was picked up by Juicy and thrown into the unknown hall. Xiahou Qing's cold voice floated over. "What exactly happened on the 7th day of the 5th lunar month? Why don't you tell me everything you found out?" Tianwen covered his sore buttocks and was caught red-handed by his master. He lowered his eyebrows and honestly said, "I basically found out what happened that day." Chapter 361. Tianwen told the truth. The first half is similar to what Ju Xiong and Susu said. That night, after Li Yi gave Susu the jade hairpin flower, she bumped into Ju Xiong. The two of them hung around Chaobai River for a while. After that, Ju Xiong was called back by the boss, and Li Yi went home alone. On the way, she bumped into the drunk envoy. Li Yi struggled hard, but the envoy kept pestering her. This scene was seen by Boss Chen, but he recognized the envoy's identity. He didn't dare to intervene and left quietly. Li Yi ran away at one point, but the envoy brought guards that night. Li Yi couldn't escape and was trapped in the White Horse Alley not far from the West Market. Ning Shu slightly frowned. "You mean, Li Yi was humiliated in the White Horse Alley?" Tianwen nodded. "It should be. I knocked on the door of every household along the White Horse Alley. Several households said that they heard a woman scream that night. But when they came out to check the situation, they were blocked by a few fierce-looking people dressed in the Southern Yang Kingdom's uniform. They even threatened to chop off the head of anyone who dared to intervene, so no one dared to intervene. That's not right. If Li Yi was humiliated in the White Horse Alley, the envoy should have left her alone after he succeeded. It's impossible for him to be so kind as to take her home. If Li Yi walked home step by step after she regained consciousness, it's impossible for her to allow her clothes to remain disheveled. There's something wrong with this logic." Ning Shu lowered her eyes and fell into deep thought. She said, "Apart from that, did the witnesses in the White Horse Alley hear or see anything else?" There were dogs of the Southern Yang Kingdom blocking the door, so they couldn't see anything. But then they heard a young man's voice, claiming to be the young master of some family. Then there was a dispute. The young master should have been scared away by the envoy's arrogance. Li Yi couldn't escape from the envoy's claws. When those bastards from the Southern Yang Kingdom left, an auntie mustered up her courage and opened the door to see which family's young lady was suffering and whether she needed help. A carriage rushed over and took the young lady away. Which family's carriage? That I don't know. After all, no one would stick a big surname on their carriage as soon as they leave the house. However, Auntie said that the carriage was tall and big, and she could tell at a glance that it was rich. She poked her head out to take a look, but she was frightened by the stares of the people who got out of the car. The next day, Li Yi was found to have fainted by the river and her undergarment was far away. It was similar to what Ning Shu knew. The doubt in her eyes deepened. She really did not understand what kind of role this young master who suddenly appeared would play in Li Yi's matter and even in this case. At the side, Xiahou Qing pondered for a moment and said, "When will the carriage appear?" Heaven's Inquisition said, "Auntie said that it should be around 9 o'clock. Xiahou Qing called out to Ning Shu. He stood up and said, "Let's go to Yongchengwei." Hey! Ning Shu was somewhat puzzled. Xiahou Qing patiently explained, Shi City has always been the most lively in the western part of the city. It is also the place where conflicts and hidden dangers are most likely to arise. Yongchengwei will definitely patrol the vicinity of Shi City every night. If I remember correctly, their patrol route at 9 o'clock happens to pass by Whitehorse Lane. A tall and big carriage walking in the silent night will definitely attract the attention of Yongchengwei. Therefore, if you want to know which carriage it is very simple to find Yongchengwei and ask. Ning Shu's eyes lit up. Good, good, good. Let's go immediately. Ning Shu excitedly followed Xiahou Qing all the way to Yongchengwei. It had to be said that Xiahou Qing was simply a signature weapon that was necessary to solve a case. As long as he showed his face, all the doors would happily open for him, saving Ning Shu a lot of trouble. Ning Shu was still lamenting that His Highness the Crown Prince's face was really good-looking. No matter who she left, she could not leave Xiahou Qing. She did not expect an unexpected answer that almost made her stunned. "What did you say?" she asked again in disbelief. She almost doubted her ears. The imperial bodyguard on duty that night looked at her suspiciously. It seemed that he wanted to say that Miss Ning did not hear him clearly even though his voice was so loud. There were no rumors about her hearing in her prime. However, even if he did not give face to the monk, he still patiently repeated, "I said, that night at 9 o'clock, there was indeed a carriage passing by Whitehorse Lane. After we asked, the other side took out the token of the Prime Minister's residence. The one sitting inside was the Prime Minister's residence's young master." Chapter 362. Not only was Ning Shu confused, but Tian Wen, Huemo, and even Xiahou Qing found it hard to believe. Tian Wen blurted out, "The Prime Minister's son? There are only 2 sons in the Prime Minister's residence. Isn't that Tan Siwei and Tan Shaoqing? The token of the Prime Minister's residence can't be faked. Yongchengwei isn't blind either. Then why didn't he say anything? Could it be that he has a guilty conscience? My goodness, do you still remember that Tan Shaoqing's name was on the brothel keeper's list? Could it be that he lied to us and knew the location of the secret passage? Heaven's Inquisition only made a bold assumption, but it gave him goosebumps. If this case was really related to Tan Siwei, then it wasn't just a simple case. It was a scandal that would shock the whole country. If the minister of the Supreme Court committed the crime, then the Supreme Court, which had been in charge of correcting cases and punishing serious criminals for the people for hundreds of years, would lose its authority. We can't make baseless guesses without evidence. Based on my understanding of him, Tan Shaoqing isn't that kind of person." Ning Shu thought of her previous judgment of an acquaintance and calmed down. Did the envoy have any contact with Tan Shaoqing after entering the capital? Ju Sai had roughly flipped through the small mountain of files earlier and had a rough understanding. She said, "A few times. The first time was when the envoy entered the capital. The emperor ordered the prime minister to welcome him outside the city. Tan Shaoqing was accompanying him. Then, at the palace banquet to welcome the envoy praised Tan Shaoqing, saying that he had the style of his father and had a bright future. After that, Tan Shaoqing became familiar with the envoy. Tan Shaoqing also met the envoy a few times, but they didn't talk much. But there was once, 8 days ago, when the envoy had set the date of his return trip, he specially sent a letter to Prime Minister Tan, inviting only Prime Minister Tan to meet alone. Prime Minister Tan used the excuse that he was busy with official business and did not meet. It was Minister Tan who went to meet him. He stayed at the envoy's post house for more than 2 hours before he came out. In this way, it was barely acceptable that these two were acquaintances. Then, Ju Sai added, according to the spies, when Minister Tan came out of the post house, his face was very ugly, as if he had been greatly offended. The envoy sent someone to send him off, but he didn't even say goodbye before getting into the car and leaving. After hearing this, Ning Shu's expression became serious again. Tan Siwei was like Le Gongqian. He was like a doe that wouldn't get angry no matter how you needed it. However, he didn't even care about basic etiquette at that time, which meant that the two of them had a very unpleasant night. What kind of inappropriate words did the envoy say to infuriate him? Would this become Tan Siwei's opportunity to kill him? No one knew. For a moment, several scenes related to Tan Siwei flooded into her mind like flying catkins, floating through her mind one by one. In those fragments, There was his bashful smile, the brothel keeper writing down his name, the joke about the man who cut Ju Yu's robe and Tan Shaoqing's size, the carriage that passed by the White Horse Lane, and the hesitation and absent-mindedness in his eyes after rummaging through the old files all night. In the end, it all became the alibi that he said 2 days ago in Donglai Shun. Li Ning Shu pursed her lips and said with a serious expression, that night, he was in a hurry to take stock of the list of criminals, so he stayed at the Supreme Court and worked through the night. Deputy Zheng and Deputy Xie in the temple can testify for him. So, if you want to know if there is a possibility that he killed someone, there is the fastest way to verify his alibi. Chapter 363. After leaving the Yongchengwei Yamen, Ning Shu fell into a rare silence, as if she had fallen into some kind of hesitation. Next to her, Shi Yang crossed his arms behind his head and glanced at her. He taunted, "Are you anxious or worried? You look so nervous. Are you afraid that your fiancé is involved in this murder case?" Ning Shu's forehead bulged and she glared at him. This damned child wanted to kill her. Shi Yang raised his chin and deliberately stuck out his tongue at her. Ning Shu finally understood that this brat was purposely taking revenge on her for snatching the chicken. However, she couldn't find the time to deal with him now. She hurriedly looked at Xiahou Qing and saw that his jade-colored face was cold as expected. She hurriedly walked over and explained in a small voice, "I really don't want to find out that this case is related to Tan Shaoqing. However, I don't feel sorry for him. I just feel that it would be a pity." Xiahou Qing said indifferently, "Just a pity?" Ning Shu's face was full of sincerity and she looked as if she wanted to swear to the heavens to express her sincerity. "Of course. Your Highness, you know that Tan Shaoqing and I had a misunderstanding. It really is nothing." This was indeed her selfish thoughts. In her heart, although Tan Siwei looked childish and pure, he was a rare gentleman. His ambition was not in the imperial court, but because of his status, he had to leave the mountains and rivers he yearned for and was forced to be involved in a complicated furnace that he was not used to. Even so, he had always done his best to do what he was not good at. No matter if it was things or people, he never had any resentment. If such a gentleman were to fall, it would make Ning Shu feel pity. However, when it came to handling cases, it was never about reason, but cold evidence. Ning Shu's attitude of being obedient was good. It dispelled the mist on Xiahou Qing's face. He snorted and reluctantly turned the page. However, he was still unhappy about the word fiancé. However, his pride as the heir of Nanping Prince made him unwilling to show it. Ning Shu secretly wiped her sweat. Xiahou Qing said indifferently, "What do you plan to do next?" Ning Shu organized her thoughts and said, "First, without alerting anyone else, think of a way to find Deputy Zheng and Deputy Xie alone and ask them about Tan Shaoqing's movements on the night of the 12th of May. Second, if Tan Shaoqing was really the culprit, then what relationship does he have with the Xue family and Xue Hongyi? We need to investigate this as well." Xiahou Qing nodded. "Shi Yang, Tian Wen, I'll leave the first task to you. You've been particularly talkative recently. You must be bored to death." As soon as Shi Yang finished his prank, he didn't expect that he would be punished. Extreme joy begets sorrow. Hui Mo, who had been eating meat pies obediently next to him, was even more shocked. God had mercy on him, but he didn't say or do anything. It was an unexpected disaster. How could it be like this? Hui Mo, who had no one to complain to, was dragged by Shi Yang to do the task. Ning Shu, Xiahou Qing, and the others rushed to the Xue family's ancestral grave in the suburbs, which was also the place where Xue Hongyi was buried. "This is not good, right?" Tian Wen swallowed his saliva and hesitated. Ning Shu looked at him. "What's wrong with this?" Tian Wen said, "It's broad daylight. What if we are misunderstood by doing this kind of thing? My family's reputation is going to be ruined." Ning Shu's mouth twitched and rolled up her sleeves. "Isn't it just digging a grave? Why are you talking so much nonsense? If you can't do it, I'll do it. I can. Of course I can. All the men in our Nanping mansion can do it." Tian Wen straightened his neck and said, "But I heard that digging up ancestral graves will lead to ghosts and nightmares at night." Ning Shu said fiercely, "I was worried that no one would tell me the truth of that year. No one. It's not bad if a ghost comes. It doesn't have to wait until night to find me. The sooner the better. It's best if it comes out now. I'll be the happiest. Ning Shu's gloomy smile scared Tian Wen. He felt that she was 100 times more terrible than the dead bodies lying in the ground. Tian Wen quickly took the shovel and said, "Lady Ning, don't laugh like that. I'm scared. Don't come over. I'll start digging the grave now." Chapter 364. On the other side, Tian Wen was sweating profusely with a shovel under the sun. On the other side, Ning Shu was leisurely wandering in front of the hundreds of tombstones in the Shui family's ancestral grave. Occasionally, she would squat down to look at something, then she would get up and continue to walk forward. After she finished walking around the entire cemetery, she wiped her sweat and walked back to the tree where Xiaoho Qing was resting. She picked up a bowl of herbal tea. Xiaoho Qing sat calmly under the tree. His posture was relaxed and elegant, as if wherever he was, whether it was a desolate and horrifying cemetery or a luxurious and intoxicating palace banquet, it was no different to him. Ning Shu had to admire his composure. After Ning Shu drank the herbal tea, Xiaoho Qing opened his mouth. Shui Hongyi has been dead for more than 20 years. Her body should have turned into bones. Ning Shu did not think, "I know." Xiaoho Qing said, "Then what do you want to find out by digging up her grave?" Ning Shu slyly raised her eyebrows. "I want to find out if someone will come." Her eyes were as clear as a mirror. She glanced around and bent down to whisper in Xiaoho Qing's ear, "This cemetery is very strange. Although there were weeds in front of the other graves, they were not in large patches, and the grass did not grow very high. Only Shui Hongyi's grave was covered in weeds. If it were not for the stone tablet standing here, no one would have known that the beautiful courtesan whose name shook the capital more than 20 years ago was buried under the dirt mound. Does heir know what this means?" Her soft lips were less than an inch away from his ear. Her soft breath was like the lush green bristlegrass in spring. It gently and deliberately tickled his ear, tickling him all over. Xiaoho Qing's Adam's apple rolled silently. Heat surged in his chest, as if the midsummer evening had arrived. The burgeoning, slightly moist emotions made him restless. His right palm silently pressed on his thigh to suppress a flaw that was about to come out. However, the mischievous person deliberately blinked her eyes and asked in a simple and curious voice, "Why is your highness's ear red? Was it too hot? I'll fan you right away." Xiaoho Qing was so angry that he was at a loss for words. He did his best to put on an unmoved and cold face. With a businesslike attitude, he said, "The grass is low and sparse, indicating that it has been regularly cleaned. This place was desolate, and normally, no one would pass by. Moreover, there were over 100 tombs here, so it was definitely not a simple matter to clean them up. Thus, they were either descendants of the Shui family, or family retainers like Bai Hong who were lucky enough to survive. However, Shui Hongyi was left out. There are two possibilities for this. First, Shui Hongyi entered the brothel and degraded herself, burying the Shui family's reputation. The gravediggers disdained to sweep her grave and treated her as if she didn't exist. Second, after Xiaoho Qing mentioned the first possibility, a thoughtful look appeared on his face. Ning Shu smiled and said, "That's the only possibility, isn't it?" After bending for so long, Ning Shu was a little tired. She straightened up, but just as her lips were about to leave his ear, a hand suddenly reached out and pulled her back. The owner of the hand raised his eyebrows and joked, "Didn't you just say that you were going to fan me? Juicy, give her a fan." Ning Shu looked at the fan that Juicy gave her, and then looked at the person's joking expression. She took the fan woodenly and began to fan him. However, it was her first time fanning someone, so she was a little unfamiliar. Xiaoho Qing sometimes used too little strength, and sometimes he was too far away. "The wind is too weak, I can barely feel it. Use more strength." Ning Shu used more strength. Xiaoho Qing said, "No, it's still too small. Didn't you have breakfast? This way, you'll be closer." Ning Shu approached. Xiaoho Qing said, "Closer." Ning Shu took another step closer. Xiaoho Qing continued to be picky. "Why do you keep fanning behind me? Come to the front." Ning Shu couldn't bear it anymore and went around him with the fan. When she came around, she suddenly tripped over something and fell to one side uncontrollably, sitting on Xiahou Qing's lap and falling into his arms. The summer clothes were so thin that the chaotic heartbeat in his solid chest was clearly transmitted to Ning Shu's heart through the thin layers of clothes. It was so strong, so flustered, exactly the same as the one in her chest. This day was really hot, so hot that it made people feel flustered and flushed. For a moment, she didn't even know where to put her hands and feet. She wanted to get up, but she also wanted to stay like this for a while. Her legs were numb. Xiahou Qing lowered his white jade-carved face and said in a low voice, "It's so close, the fan should be cool." Continue. With one sentence, Ning Shu was boiled by the slightly dry air of the early summer. Chapter 365. Ning Shu had completely lost this round. Fortunately, Ju Sai had tactfully turned his head away. There was one less person to witness her embarrassment and shyness at this moment. On the other side, seeing Tianwen gasping for breath as he climbed out of the grave, Ning Shu hurriedly jumped out of Xiahou Qing's arms as if she had been electrocuted. Acting like a gentleman, she couldn't wait to get as far away from Xiahou Qing as possible. Tianwen didn't know what was going on. He ran over with the shovel covered in dirt, sweating profusely. He looked around and suddenly felt that the atmosphere wasn't right. His keen gossiping radar rang, and his intuition told him that he had missed something interesting. He looked curiously at his Shizzy, then at the blushing Ning Shu, and finally at Ju Sai. Fortunately, Ju Sai was a very reliable person. He expressionlessly helped Ning Shu out of the situation. "What did you find in the grave?" Tianwen wiped his sweat. "Ah. There were no funerary objects in the grave. The clothes were all rotten. Other than a handful of bones, there was nothing else. Lady Ning, why don't you go take a look?" Ning Shu walked over to the open coffin and looked around. Sure enough, there was nothing. The bones had been dried and brittle by the passage of time. Nothing could be found. Ning Shu bowed solemnly to the tomb owner and said sorry for the disturbance. Tianwen curiously asked, "What do we do next?" Ning Shu shaded her eyes with her hand and looked up at the dazzling golden crow wheel in the sky. She mysteriously said, "Wait." Tianwen didn't know what she was trying to do, but since she wanted them to wait, she must have her reasons. Since he was sweaty and tired, it was good to take the opportunity to rest. Thus, the group sat leisurely under the lush 100-year-old tree to enjoy the cool air. They also ate lunch while they were at it. It was already past noon, but the graveyard was still quiet. Other than them, there were no other ghosts. Ning Shu clapped her hands regretfully, waking up Tianwen who was dozing off. She stood up and said, "Sure enough, that person didn't come. Restore the coffin to its original state and bury it back." Heaven's Inquisition rubbed his face in dismay. "You didn't do anything, and you buried it back just like that. Then what's the point of all my hard work? Who says it's meaningless? Our guess has already been confirmed. Your Highness, don't you agree?" Satisfied to see Xiahou Qing nodding his head in agreement, Ning Shu smiled in satisfaction. But soon, she smacked her lips and said in distress, "But now it's a little difficult to fish that person out. Do I really have to activate my killer move?" Tianwen Hao asked curiously, "What killer move?" Ning Shu blinked and eagerly asked, "Tianwen, do you think it's a little immoral to set fire to the ancestral grave of the Shui family?" Heaven's Inquisition. That's more than a little immoral. This was simply insane and immoral, okay. But in order to solve this case, I have no choice but to be immoral. The ancestors of the Shui family are all loyal people. They know that I'm doing this to solve the current predicament of the Yu family, so they definitely won't hold it against me. In a short while, Ning Shu had finished explaining herself and ordered, "Tianwen, light the fire." "What? You're really going to light the fire?" "Lady Ning, if you want to be immoral, go do it yourself. Why do you have to drag me down with you?" In just 20 short years, Tianwen had doubts about life for the first time. He also had serious doubts about his crown prince's vision. A torch was lit. Ning Shu held the torch and walked indifferently into the depths of the cemetery. She stopped in front of the tombstone of the founding ancestor of the Shui family. The tombstone might have once been majestic and solemn, and was revered by thousands of people. But now, it had been eroded beyond recognition by the wind and rain. Only the blurry engravings could barely make out the name of the great founding general. Ning Shu stood in front of the tombstone and looked at it coldly for a while. Then, she reached out her hand and licked the flickering flame on the tombstone that was riddled with holes. The flame spread along the tombstone to the withered branches and weeds on the ground. Just as the fire was about to engulf the entire cemetery, a cold arrow flew over from 100 steps away, emitting a cold light. Ning Shu ducked and dodged it as if she had eyes on the back of her head. She shouted at Xiahou Qing, "Your Highness, reel in the net." Chapter 366. 100 steps away, a grey-clothed, bony figure hiding behind a tree immediately became alert and wanted to leave. However, the guards of Prince Nanping's mansion were even faster. They all flew out from their hiding spots and blocked Grey Mage Lurker's path of retreat. The urn was ready and waiting for the turtle to enter. Seeing this, Grey Mage Lurker clenched his teeth and raised the bow in his hand. 3 sharp arrows were shot toward Xiahou Qing. Xiahou Qing tilted his head and listened to the wind. He raised his folding fan and knocked down the 3 arrows with the slender ribs of the fan. Grey Mage Lurker quickly changed his target and raised 3 more arrows toward Ning Shu. After 3 arrows, another 3 arrows flew toward Ning Shu. The arrows weaved into an inescapable net and flew toward Ning Shu. She was unable to resist at all. Ning Shu was exhausted from running for her life and was unable to dodge in time. Soon, her arm was grazed by an arrow. As it turned out, this move of his was indeed effective. Seeing this, Heaven's Inquisition immediately led his men to protect Ning Shu. After diverting a portion of the firepower, Grey Mage Lurker immediately put away his bow and prepared to attack from the loophole. Hearing that, Xiahou Qing slightly creased his brows. Holding the paper fan, he was about to stand up when Ju Sai respectfully said, "Lord, let me do it." He took out a heavy blade from the guard beside him and politely nodded his head toward Grey Mage Lurker, "Please excuse me." Then, he raised the blade and ferociously slashed toward Grey Mage Lurker with lightning speed. This was the first time Ning Shu had seen Ju Sai in action, which was completely different from his usual gentle and cold temperament. When he raised his saber, his posture was like that of a ferocious and hungry wolf. He would not let go of his prey once he had bitten it to death. Ning Shu was greatly shocked. Only now did she understand why Hui Mo, Heaven's Inquisition, and Shi Yang, these 3 brats, were willing to obediently lower their heads and acknowledge Ju Sai as their boss. Good heavens, they were simply 2 different faces. Never offend him in the future. When Tianwen saw Ju Sai intervening, he immediately put away his sword and stood aside to watch the show. At the same time, he whispered to Ning Shu, "Among the 4 of us, although each of us has inherited some outstanding skills from His Highness, in fact, the one who learned the most is still Ju Sai. This guy worships His Highness like a god. Not only did he learn strategy and martial arts, but he also delved into a particularly domineering saber technique to protect His Highness. This is his secret weapon, which is usually not used easily. Lady Ning, just you wait. In less than the time it takes for 2 incense sticks to burn, you will have him." Reality proved that Heaven's Inquisition was not boasting. Today, they had already set up an ambush ahead of time. On top of that, Grey Mage Lurker's arm was injured 2 days ago. No matter how good his Qinggong was, he wouldn't be able to use it if he were to fall into a trap. Furthermore, he had encountered the dark Ju Sai today. After the time it takes for 2 incense sticks to burn, Grey Mage Lurker fell in front of Ning Shu and the others with several saber wounds all over his body. Ju Sai put away his saber and said, "Excuse me." He kicked away the crossbow that could take someone's life from 100 steps away. Then, he stepped forward and sealed Grey Mage Lurker's acupuncture point. Ning Shu stepped forward with a smile on her face. She removed the cloth covering Grey Mage Lurker's face and looked at his pale and gloomy face. She raised her eyebrows and said, "If you didn't appear today, I might have to continue racking my brains to figure out your true identity. However, since you have appeared today, you have saved me a lot of trouble." Grey Mage Lurker, Xin Chen, I have wanted to see your true appearance for a long time. Perhaps I can call you by your second name, Xueran. Grey Mage Lursk's body stiffened when that name that had been dead for many years was mentioned again after more than 20 years. Then, as if he had received a great insult, he roared with a voice as hoarse as a vulture's, "Don't call me by that name. That trash Xueran had already died 20 years ago and turned into a pile of bones. He is already dead." Ningxu said. Then, the one who survived is the Grey Mage Lursk who betrayed the third prince's residence for glory? Or is he the most trusted aide of the mastermind behind the Plum Blossom Kiss? No matter which one it is, I wonder what your Xue family's loyal and courageous founding general would think when he saw his descendant in such a state. Chapter 367. Is an idiot worthy of being my master? Xueran laughed sinisterly. He glanced at Ningxu. You want to trick me into revealing my master's true identity with your clumsy provocation? Little girl, you're too naive. He laughed mockingly. Now that I've fallen into your hands, I'm not as skilled as you. You can kill me or cut me up as you wish. Saying this, he closed his eyes and didn't say another word. It was clear that he didn't want to cooperate with Ningxu. Ningxu was angered by his attitude and laughed. She stood in front of him and said condescendingly, "Your father is General Xue, so I'll respectfully call you Major General Xue." Major General Xue, you're really unafraid of death. I heard that the Xue family has been loyal for generations, willing to shed blood for the people. But this time, young General participated in the murder of the Southern Yang envoy, pushing you into a dangerous situation, and also pushing millions of people into the abyss of suffering. Aren't you afraid that the ancestors of the Xue family will be so angry that they'll jump out of their graves? Hit where it hurt, Xueran gritted his teeth. Shut up. None of you have the right to say this to me. Anyone with a discerning eye could see the injustice of our Xue clan. However, whether it was more than 20 years ago or now, no one dared to stand out and say a word for our Xue clan. It can be imagined that the Xiao family's world is rotten to the bone. Such a filthy country, such selfish and ignorant people, why would my Xue family protect it? He sneered. It's better to let it be destroyed in my hands. It'll be clean. Ningxu went straight to the point. So, you admit that you killed the envoy? I wish that beast had died by my hands, so that I could avenge my blood feud. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Xueran raised his eyelids and said, "You want to use my head to extinguish the anger of Southern Yang Kingdom, to wag your tail and beg for mercy from Southern Yang Kingdom, to protect those ignorant rulers and foolish people? Wishful thinking. If you want to pour dirty water on my head, then show me evidence. Otherwise, even if I have to destroy both of my arms, I will never sign my confession." Ningxu's eyes were as bright as a blade. "Do you dare to say that you weren't the one who revealed the location of the secret passage to Zhu Xiong in Donglai a few days ago and tempted him to commit the crime? Even if you changed your appearance that day, your voice and posture cannot be changed. There are plenty of witnesses who can testify against you." Xueran had a glib tongue. "I was indeed the one who revealed the secret passage, but there are many people who know about it. As long as people have mouths, they can spread it everywhere. I only mentioned the existence of such a secret passage to Zhu Xiong. Who would have guessed that he would seek revenge? I have a conclusive witness. That night, my old illness flared up and I stayed in the medical center. The doctors in the medical center and other injured people can testify for me. What about the state of the envoy's death? It's exactly the same as your sister's crime. You're also involved in that old woman's death. Do you dare to say that you didn't intervene? Even if you are not the mastermind, you are an accomplice. My sister's crime shook the whole country. I don't know how many people know about it. This kind of thing can be easily found out by asking around. What makes you think that I am the suspect? As for that old woman, I was indeed the one who killed her. I also peeled off her face with my own hands. But that's because she deserved to die. If it wasn't for her betrayal, my sister wouldn't have ended up like that." Ningxu raised her eyebrows and continued to persuade him. "Wasn't that old woman your sister's personal servant? That year, your sister redeemed herself from the brothel to get married. She even redeemed that servant girl. The old people in Shi City all said that your sister and that servant girl Baiju had a very good relationship. To outsiders, they were master and servant, but in reality, they were like sisters. After your sister committed suicide, she also suffered a big blow and went crazy. What? Did she do something outrageous? Ning Shu's words didn't fool Xueran. He sneered and said, I know what you're thinking, but I'm not afraid to tell you. If it wasn't for that vicious woman, my sister would still be living well in this world, with a large number of children and grandchildren. But because of her betrayal, she drugged my sister's tea, causing my sister to be humiliated by that scoundrel. Her mentality collapsed, and the marriage was called off, becoming the topic of countless people's idle conversations. And that evil woman's conscience was bought over just for 50 taels of silver. You tell me, does she deserve to die? Chapter 368. Ning Shu didn't expect that there was such an inside story behind Xuehongyi's death. She opened her eyes wide in surprise and felt even more sorry for the former courtesan queen, who had an extraordinary temperament and maverick personality, but had died in such a short time. She said, So you faked your death and changed your appearance in order to wait for the day when you can avenge her and your Xue family. For this reason, you did not hesitate to mold yourself into a puppet, a knife in the hands of your master. Xuerant's skinny face was full of malice. He said with a hateful look, You have no right to insult my master. Compared to that fatuous ruler, my master is the most upright and righteous person in the world. Ning Shu and Xiahou Qing's expressions changed at the same time. Xiahou Qing stepped forward and said, You have been hiding for many years. Your purpose should be to wash away the injustice of your Xue family. Why don't we make a deal? If you are willing to reveal the identity of the murderer and the person behind you, I, Xiahou Qing, promise you that I will fulfill your wish. Xueran wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Okay, I can think about it. But in order to show your sincerity, shouldn't you first unseal my acupoints? Tian Wen crossed his arms and said with a blade of grass in his mouth, Then don't dream about it. It was not easy to catch you. If we release the tiger back to the mountain, wouldn't it make us look stupid? We don't have the leisure time like Zhuge Liang. Xueran regretfully bowed his head, If you don't understand, then don't understand. I have no other choice. Let me think about it carefully. He agreed so readily that Ning Shu became alert. She immediately grabbed Xiahou Qing's arm and took a step back. But Xueran suddenly raised his head and spat out a mouthful of poisonous smoke. I've made up my mind. Let's perish together. When Ning Shu saw the black smoke in his mouth, she immediately held her breath. She immediately reached out her sleeve to shield Xiahou Qing, but she was one step too late. Xiahou Qing inhaled a small amount of poisonous smoke, and his originally pale lips turned even darker. He actually felt defeated. His throat surged, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He then forcibly suppressed it. Ning Shu looked anxious and reached out to wipe away the blood at the corner of his mouth. Seeing this, Ju Sai angrily swung his heavy saber, chopping off one of Xuerant's arms and legs. Blood splattered everywhere. But as if he couldn't feel the pain, he laughed maniacally. Rumor has it that Xiahou is brilliant, but he has lost his 3 senses. That's true. You've inhaled my poisonous smoke. With a person like you buried with me, my trip to the human world has not been in vain. Ha 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 ha. Master, I've been loyal to you. Accompanied by his maniacal laughter, his body quickly turned black and collapsed at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as if his flesh and blood were being sucked dry and evaporated. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a horrible mummy. When he fell, his dark and empty teeth still maintained the sinister and crazy smile from when he was alive. But what was even more terrifying was that after his body fell to the ground, a muffled sound suddenly came from the deepest part of the ground. Everyone's footsteps faltered, and they felt the increasingly obvious shaking of the earth from the bottom of their feet. Heaven's Inquisition immediately threw out a rope and tied it to the 100-year-old tree beside him. He shouted, Let's go. But it was too late. The ground was torn open like a giant tiger's mouth. The ground shook and collapsed, swallowing the people on the ground one by one. When she fell into the crack, She pushed Xiahou Qing away and toward Ju Sai. In the thick cloud of dust, her body fell weightlessly toward the bottomless abyss below. Xiahou Qing's figure was deeply reflected in her mind. Her heart was full of reluctance, but in the end, it turned into a smile. She said, "Goodbye, Xiahou Qing. I'll go to the netherworld to report first. You're not in a hurry, but you have to take your time." Chapter 369. She smiled and waved her hand, closing her eyes. She thought that this kind of farewell seemed to be free and easy. It was a pity that she had been wearing men's clothing for the past few days to make it easier to investigate the case. She had died so many times, but this was the first time she fell to her death. Would she fall into a meat patty and be extremely ugly? However, Xiahou Qing couldn't see her anyway, so it didn't matter if she was ugly. Thinking like this, she became happy again. Hee, it was pretty good, pretty good. Father, mother, and little Ji she would leave them to Xiahou Qing. He should be able to protect them very well, definitely better than her. Just as she was about to soar into the sky, a rope suddenly flew down from above and bound her waist. Ju Sai Tian shouted in shock, "Air!" Ning Shu suddenly opened her eyes, her jet-black pupils clearly reflecting that moonlight-white wind, that cold and arrogant figure, his wide sleeves carrying the wind as he walked towards her like a deity, the black brocade in front of his eyes being swept away by the wind. His jade-white face came closer and closer to her, until he pulled her into his arms. There was another earthquake, and the crack above closed again. Ju Sai and the others used their weapons to pry open the crack, but in the end, their swords broke and their knives cracked. They knelt on the ground. Drip, drip. There was the sound of something sticky dripping on the ground. After fainting for an unknown period of time, Ning Shu woke up from the darkness. Her whole body was cold, and only the soft warmth below her allowed her to find a little support in this bone-chilling cold. She instinctively moved closer to that precious warmth, sticking closer to it. In the next moment, she woke up and immediately flipped over, opening her eyes wide. Borrowing a ray of light from the crack in the stone, Ning Shu looked at the strangely quiet Xiahou Qing below her. She trembled as she reached out a finger to check his breathing. She then leaned down to listen to his weak heartbeat. Ripples appeared in her eyes. "Xiahou Qing, are you sick? Do you know that you have been hit by the kiss of the plum blossom and some unknown poisonous smoke? You could die at any time. Why did you jump down? You lunatic, I don't need you to be a hero. Do you hear me? I don't appreciate it at all." Her mouth said the most heartless words, but the transparent and boiling liquid rolled down from her eyes and merged with the small pool of blood that had accumulated under his body. Even in the face of death, she had never been so flustered before. But now, she was flustered. She was so flustered that she was scared to death. Frantically, she tore open his clothes and examined his injuries. She found 2 wounds, one on his right shoulder blade and the other on his palm. When he was falling with her in his arms, he must have first used his hands to support himself and then used his shoulder blades to resist the rest of the fall. She didn't know how high they were from the ground, but it was enough to shatter his palm and shatter his shoulder bone. The bright red color that was constantly gushing out of his body made his skin pale. It was a ghastly sight. She raised her hand to wipe away the tears on her face and looked left and right. In this unfamiliar underground darkness, she could not hope to find any medicine that could stop the bleeding. She knelt on the ground and carefully searched for a long time before she found a few withered hay. She took out a match and lit the hay on fire. In order to prevent the dried grass from falling to the ground, she quickly reached out to hold the ashes of the dried grass in her hands. She let the last bit of ash clean her palm. She could no longer feel the burning pain. She didn't have time to care if her palm was burned or not. She grabbed the precious ash and carefully applied it to his wounds. Then she turned around to take off her outer robe and tore a clean cloth from her inner robe to wrap his wounds. After doing all of this, she half dragged and half carried the unconscious Xiahou Qing to a clean large rock. Feeling his breathing become a bit weaker, the fear in her heart once again raged. In front of her, this person had always been proud, strong, and omnipotent. Even when he was poisoned and couldn't smell or see, he had never lowered his proud head. She never thought that he would have a time when he was this weak. Tears once again filled her eyes. She forcefully bit her lower lip and held this person in her arms. She kept rubbing his body, his limbs, trying to get rid of the paleness on his lips and the coldness on his body. However, it seemed to be in vain. She fiercely said, "Us women are the most heartless. Once a lover dies, we can turn around and find a new one. You better wake up soon, otherwise I won't care about you. Do you hear me?" Chapter 370. Xiahou Qing fell into a deep slumber. His lips, which had been pale and bloodless in the first place, turned dark as time passed. Ning Xu could feel that other than the two heavy injuries on his body, he was also suffering from the poison. The unknown poisonous smoke was taking away every bit of warmth from his body in an extremely tyrannical manner. But she had no other choice. She did not know where this damn place was and she did not know how to get out. She only knew that she needed fire, a lot of fire to warm his body that was getting colder and colder. There were some withered branches around her, but they were all soaked in the damp underground. She tried everything she could but could not light them up. She could only throw them to the side in annoyance. She had already taken off her outer robe and wrapped it around his body, but it was useless. The thin layer of robe could not stop his body temperature from dropping. Ning Xu bit down hard on her lower lip, her eyelashes fluttering. In the end, she finally made a decision. She walked before Xiahou Qing and knelt down. She then pulled the unconscious Xiahou Qing into her arms, hugging him tightly. She did her best to bring him close to every inch of her skin, using her body temperature to awaken his weak life force. The summer clothes were as thin as a cicada's wings and could not block anything. Wearing a thin layer of clothing and hugging a man tightly in her arms, they were as intimate as one person. This kind of abrupt and bold action was enough to shock the world. She felt her entire body burning up. She was so embarrassed that she did not dare open her eyes. But she wanted to be even hotter to warm him up. With her forehead against his neck, Ning Xu sniffled and muttered to herself, "Xiahou Qing, you better wake up for me. This lady's innocence has been ruined by you. You must wake up and take responsibility for me. If you don't say anything, then I'll take it as you agreeing." Xiahou Qing could not respond. She took the initiative and nodded, "All right, then it's settled. If you dare to turn your back on me, I will kill you to the ends of the earth. I beg you, you must wake up. I'm begging you." 2 hours passed. Perhaps it was 2 or 3 hours. The anxious wait dragged on for a long time. It was very cold underground. She hugged Xiahou Qing for a long time and her whole body went numb. Unknowingly, she fell into a half-asleep state. Until the ray of light that seeped in from the gap turned from bright to dark, and finally turned into watery moonlight that gurgled down gently. The person who had been sleeping in her arms suddenly moved. He reached out his uninjured hand and gently stroked the top of her head. Ning Xu woke up with a start. Looking at Xiahou Qing, who had come back to life, her tears flowed out uncontrollably. She felt that she was really useless today. Her feminine tears flowed out non-stop, completely unlike her Ning Xu, but she couldn't stop at all. "That's great, you're finally awake. Why did you take so long to wake up? Do you know that you scared me to death? Scared me to death, scared me to death." She wantonly complained. She couldn't hide her sobbing voice, but it made Xiahou Qing's pale and weak face reveal a gentle smile. He reached out his hand and felt around for a moment. When he touched her face, he gently used his thumb to wipe away the tear stains on her face. He said, "Sorry, I made you wait for a long time." This kind of rare gentleness hit Ning Xu's heart. But the more he was like this, the more her tears flowed out like pearls. She was like a frightened kitten that had been bullied outside and had finally been comforted by its owner. She was like a drifting dandelion in the wind that had finally found the soil to take root in. She was like a small fish that had left the shore, struggling nervously before finally returning to the water that accepted her. Hearing her sniffles, Xiahou Qing's heart ached. His palm moved to her back to gently pat and comfort her. But after 2 pats, he suddenly touched a patch of warm and smooth skin, causing his palm to tremble. Being scalded by his palm, Ning Xu was stunned for a moment. Her cheeks turned red and she quickly let go of him. But she had hugged him for too long and her body was already numb. She didn't control her strength and touched the wound on his shoulder. She immediately stopped and didn't dare to move. Chapter 371. I didn't do it on purpose. She quickly pulled open his clothes to look at the wound. Seeing that there was no blood on the cloth, she let out a sigh of relief. The next moment, she noticed the surprised expression on his face. She reflexively retracted her hand, not knowing what to do. Previously, he had been unconscious. In order to check his wound, she would pull off his clothes every once in a while. She had gotten used to it and had forgotten that he had woken up. Ning Shu's face was so hot that it was about to emit smoke. What kind of storms and waves had she not seen before? At this moment, she was dumbstruck. She was too unreserved. No, it was more than unreserved. Not only did she take the initiative to throw herself into his arms, but she also touched him all over. She was simply like a female rogue. Ning Shu closed her eyes in despair. She wished she could faint on the spot and become a coward. That would be better than now. She didn't know how to face Xiahou Qing and the current situation. Fortunately, Xiahou Qing was not much better than her. Although he couldn't see anything, when he had just woken up, he had felt every inch of her pressing against his body. Just now, his fingertips had inadvertently touched something warm and smooth, and at this moment, the softness in his arms had all been real. The heat in his chest uncontrollably surged up, causing his throat to roll slightly as a faint blush appeared on his jade-colored face. If it wasn't for the dim light and the fact that Ning Shu was utterly defeated, he was afraid that she would have already seen it. His back was injured, so he couldn't lie down. He also didn't have the strength to lean against the stone. Ning Shu could only carefully support his shoulders and help him lean against her legs. Even so, this position was still too intimate for an ordinary man and woman. But in this emergency, there was no way to pay attention to the so-called etiquette. Ning Shu coughed lightly and awkwardly changed the topic. When the crown prince was unconscious, I used the blurry light to look around. About 10 feet away from us was a sword tomb. On both sides of the sword tomb were dozens of bloody armors holding swords. There were scarecrows inside. Behind the sword tomb was a memorial tablet, and under each memorial tablet was an urn. If I'm not wrong, this is the real ancestral tomb of the Shui family, and what's above is just a smokescreen to deceive others. I don't know what method Shui Ran used to open the mechanism here. His goal is very simple. He wants to trap us here until we die. Xiahou Qing, you said that a beam of light leaked through the crack. Then, is there a way for us to use that crack to transmit our location? Ning Shu looked at the unreachable gap and sighed. That gap is very far away from us, and it's empty and stuffy here. The air is thin, so no matter how loud we make, we'll be stuck inside and can't get out. Your Highness, you're so badly injured. You don't have to think about this for the time being. Rest a little more. As long as you're well, we'll definitely think of a way to get out. Since the ancestors of the Shui family were able to bury the ashes, armors, and weapons of the previous generations, it meant that there must be a way out. When the sun comes out tomorrow and the light is brighter, I will carefully search this place again to see if I can find any hidden mechanisms. Xiahou Qing's expression was indifferent. I slept too much during the day, so I'm not sleepy for the time being. Moreover, after I die, Ning Shu remembered his theory of after death. There will be plenty of time to sleep, and felt a pain in her heart. She interrupted him and smiled. Then I'll have to trouble your Highness to analyze Shui Ran's actions with me. He clearly came prepared for revenge this time. The person behind him is the mastermind we've been investigating. There's no doubt about this. 21 years ago, when Shui Ran was only 13 years old, he was taken away by that person using the golden cicada shell shedding technique. He was tamed and trained to become his knife to kill people. I have a feeling that Shui Ran isn't the only knife in his hands. After so many years, he has enough time to gather countless people like Shui Ran from all over the country who have a blood feud and have no other way out. He'll tame them and turn them into obedient dogs at his feet. Does your Highness still remember what Shui Ran said before he died? He said, compared to that self-indulgent ruler, My master is the most upright and honorable one in the world. The incapable ruler he was talking about was naturally the current emperor. Then who is this righteous referring to? Chapter 372. Because he favored the first and second Empress Ju, especially the second Empress Ju, the former emperor did not have many children. The former crown prince's eldest son, the late old Prince Yu, was the fourth. Today's sage was the sixth. In between, a few princes died one after another due to illness or other accidents. Only today's sage and that unreliable Prince Ku Xiao Minglan were still alive in this world. In terms of legitimacy, the former crown prince Xiao Minglu was the only one. However, Xiao Minglu died in the Phoenix Algae Palace 25 years ago. He was buried under the sword of the crazy Empress Ju. This matter was witnessed by countless people. Later, when he was placed in the coffin, today's sage personally inspected the remains before ordering people to close the coffin. With today's sage's scheming mind, there was no possibility of him being able to graft a flower onto a tree. Other than the former crown prince, there were no other legitimate children. Empress Ju was favored for many years but only gave birth to a little princess. She was pulled into a fire to accompany her into the netherworld. Then who else could Xueran be talking about? Could it be Xiao Minglan? But 20 years ago, when the former emperor passed away and today's sage ascended the throne, Xiao Minglan was only a 6-year-old baby. 4 years later, Xue Hongyi committed suicide by jumping into the river. Xueran was at his wits' end. Calculating with his fingers, Xiao Minglan was only 10 years old. Would a 10-year-old child have such unfathomable scheming and terrifying desires to set up such a huge trap in advance? Ning Xu did not dare to believe it and was unwilling to believe it. Although she did not have much contact with Xiao Minglan, she really did not want such a lazy and interesting person to be the enemy they had been searching for. But, if she took 1,000 steps back and said it was really him, Ning Xu suddenly shivered. A smiling poisonous snake was far more terrifying than a ferocious beast bearing its fangs. As if sensing the fear in her heart, a hand reached over and covered the back of her hand. Xiahou Qing said softly, "The so-called legitimate does not necessarily refer to the palace coup 25 years ago. The former emperor also has a few brothers who are still alive in this world. For example, Prince Fu of Danju, Xiao Yuanli, and esteemed Prince Xiao Yuanchong of Yongju. When we get out of here and slowly investigate along this line of thought, the truth will surely come to light. Now, don't let your imagination run wild, and don't scare yourself." A light breeze came from the horizon and soothed the fear and unease in her heart. Ning Xu closed her eyes and exhaled in the darkness. Yes. In the boundless darkness, the two of them maintained their half-hugging posture, their skin touching skin. The surroundings were silent, and only their heartbeats, like two naughty sparrows jumping up and down on the branches, mingled with their inseparable breaths. The moon in the sky seemed to be covered by the clouds. The only ray of light that leaked in through the gap also left reluctantly. Staying in this darkness for a long time without being able to see anything, Ning Xu secretly exhaled into her cold palms. Does Shizzy feel scared when you see this kind of darkness every day? Ever since he lost his sight, the people around him were afraid of hurting his self-esteem, so they never dared to start such a topic. This woman's audacity was as great as ever. He, Xiahou Qing, was naturally proud, and was never willing to show the slightest bit of weakness in front of others. But at this moment, feeling her soft palm on his arm, he said, "At first, I was scared. When I was 10 years old, I lost my sense of smell when I was hit by the plum blossom kiss. From then on, I was no longer able to distinguish between the billions of scents in the world. But at that time, I was still young, and my heart was higher than the sky. I thought that losing my sense of smell wouldn't hinder me, and that I could still move unhindered in Jojo. After that, at the age of 17, I lost my sense of taste again. From then on, I couldn't taste anything. Sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy, to me, all were just to fill my stomach. Only then did I realize that the world's bitterness could only be tasted with the heart. Although I never told anyone, I knew that the next time I lost my sense of smell, it wouldn't be long. Sure enough, on the day I was 20 years old, in front of a full house of guests and in front of my parents, my eyes suddenly turned dark. Although I was prepared for that day, when it suddenly came, my heart was still filled with endless disappointment. From then on, there was no difference between day and night to me. Whether it was pleasing to the eye or ugly to the heart, it no longer had any meaning. I tried my best to show that it didn't matter, but when I couldn't even bathe and change my clothes, and needed someone to remind me whether I was awake or asleep, my heart was filled with mixed feelings. I, Xiaoho Qing, lived for 20 years, and returned to the time when I was an infant. I was half a good-for-nothing who needed to be cared for by others. It really made people not know whether to laugh or cry. But Laozi once said, "The 5 colors make one blind, the 5 sounds make one deaf, the 5 tastes make one feel good, galloping in the fields and hunting makes one's heart go crazy." It's hard to come by goods, and it makes one's heart go crazy. It's because the saint is the stomach, not the eyes, and so I went for it. Although this plum blossom kiss was hateful, it brought me one step closer to becoming a saint. It could be considered a blessing in disguise. When he spoke, his tone was calm, and even had a hint of self-mockery. But the more he was like this, the more it made Ning Shu's chest feel stuffy and sad. She couldn't help but say, "In the future, I will be with the air. No matter how dark it is, I will be your eyes." Chapter 373. She couldn't help but blurt out those words. Only then did she realize that what she had just said was no different from openly declaring in front of him, "My heart is in love with you, and I hope to grow old with you hand in hand." She was extremely embarrassed and her whole body was in a mess. It was one thing to secretly say something bad behind his back, but it was another thing to say it in front of him. Although face wasn't very useful, it was still good to have it occasionally. I mean, we are originally allies. Now that we have gone through life and death together, we can be considered close friends. Haha, the moonlight tonight is really good. Your Highness, it's late. You should rest a bit more. Your injuries will heal faster. She couldn't be more stiff in changing the topic. He said, "I'll remember." In the unfathomable night, there was a faint smile in his deep voice. "I'll remember what you said just now. If you don't do it or forget, don't blame me for taking you back to Nanping Wang's residence and making you copy it 1,000 times. Ning Shu. Previously it was 500. Now it's 1,000. Your Highness is really generous. There was even a price increase." This was really Xiaoho Qing. "Xiaoho Qing, if you think 1,000 isn't enough, 2,000 is also fine. Shiz's kindness, my daughter doesn't have the fortune to enjoy it. In this world, only you can enjoy it." Ning Shu's face turned red again. "Shizzy still has the mood to joke with me. It seems like your injuries are no longer serious. Don't worry. Although my body isn't very good, I won't die in a short time. I'll try to live a bit longer, long enough for you to fulfill your promise. Then is it too late for me to back out now? There is a saying among the people, once you've boarded a pirate ship, don't think about getting off. Ning Shu, it's too late for you." The two of them coincidentally chose this method of bickering, trying their best to dispel the uneasiness in each other's heart in the pitch-black darkness. They also secretly expressed that they cared about each other. The corners of their mouths curved, and their hearts were filled with love. Until the two of them leaned against each other and fell into a deep sleep again. When the light returned to the underground palace, it was already the next morning. Ning Shu opened her eyes and found that the outer robe was back on her body. Xiaoho Qing was leaning against the stone wall next to her and woke up before her. "Your Highness, you're heavily injured and it's cold and damp underground. You should wear this robe first. It's just some superficial wounds. I'm not a woman. I can't catch a cold during confinement. Don't worry, I promised you that I won't die for the time being. Juicy and the others must be thinking of a way to come down. You should put on your clothes properly." She hadn't drunk a drop of water for nearly 16 hours, and after going through so many twists and turns, even if she wasn't injured, she was still somewhat exhausted. She was like an arrow at the end of its flight, let alone Xiaoho Qing. She knew that he was only pretending to be calm and collected. This wasn't the way to go. Rather than waiting for others to rescue him, it was better to take the initiative. She thought about it and decided to listen to him. She put on her outer robe and tied it tightly. There's no water or dry food here. Your Highness, don't move around so as to avoid wasting your strength. Right now, the light is good. I'll go to the Shui family's memorial tablet and sword mound to look around and see if I can find the mechanism. Xiahou Qing nodded and suppressed the cough in his throat. Be careful. Millimeter Ning Shu lifted the corner of her robe and walked forward. Since the founding of Great Yu 200 years ago, the Shui family had been generals for many generations. They had a total of 9 generations of descendants. Not a single one of their men had not died on the battlefield. Boiling hot blood gushed out of their bodies and splashed over every piece of armor and weapon. As time passed, the blood gradually dried up and turned black, rotting away along with the armors and weapons that their masters had worn when they were alive. Walking in front of the rows of strawman armors, Ning Shu could not help but feel reverence as she approached. Thinking about how the Shui family, who had sacrificed their lives for the country, ended up with their entire family dying a horrible death and being cursed by the people of the world, her emotions became even more complicated. Fortunately, the heroes had died. Otherwise, she would have shed tears. And the Shui family's example could very well be her Ning family's example. No, it couldn't be like this. Even if she exhausted all her strength, she wouldn't let the Ning family follow in the Shui family's footstep. Ning Shu's fingernails dug deep into her palms to wake herself up. She then took a deep breath and walked to the rows of silent memorial tablets in front of the Shui family. She respectfully bowed. Seniors, if I may be so bold as to offend you. After bowing, she began to investigate. She knocked on the surrounding walls one by one, but the sound was dull and there was no echo. Yesterday's violent earthquake did not collapse a single piece of stone. She thought that the stone walls were made of molten iron and were incomparably sturdy. She took out more than 40 iron swords from the sword tomb and examined them one by one. There was no mechanism underneath. The armor was too heavy to move. Ning Shu tried a few times and could only give up. She focused her attention on the memorial tablets. There were a total of 142 memorial tablets for the 9 generations of the Shui family. Most of them were mottled with paint over the years. Only a few of them were still written clearly. Ning Shu's gaze swept over the memorial tablets one by one. Her gaze suddenly settled on a new memorial tablet in the corner, and her pupils abruptly constricted. Ancestor Shui Hongyi's memorial tablet was erected in the year of Huaiyu in the year of Xin Mao. She turned her head in astonishment and said, I know why in the ancestral tombs above, only Shui Hongyi's memorial tablet has not been cleaned. It's because the one buried there is not her real body. The real Shui Hongyi did not die 21 years ago. She hid somewhere and quietly survived. It was not until 12 years later in the 4th month of the year of Xin Chou that she truly died. Not only that, she also gave birth to a child in these 12 years. Chapter 374. Xiahou Qing leaned against the stone wall and did not respond. She called again, Shizzy. Xiahou Qing still did not move. Her heart tightened. She quickly abandoned the memorial tablet and ran back. She found that Xiahou Qing had already fainted. She touched his forehead and found that it was burning hot. His lips were an abnormal gray color. Oh no! His poison was acting up. No wonder before she woke up, he had already moved to the stone wall to lean against it. It was to not let her find out and not let her worry. He had been holding on. He would rather quietly endure the suffering of the poison than let her know. Xiahou Qing, you really are. Ning Shu knelt on the ground and carefully checked his breath. It was not much stronger than a gossamer thread. It was about to break, but at least it was not broken. Her throat was choked. She tightly gripped the corner of his clothes. Really, so annoying. Her vision became blurry again. She did her best to suppress the tears that had yet to come. She said firmly, I won't let you die. Even if the King of Hell and the 10 Kings of Hell come to steal you from me, I will take you back from him. With me, there is no such thing as death for you. She forcefully bit her lips, her teeth digging deep into her flesh. She used the sharp pain and the smell of blood to help her maintain her calm and clear mind. She walked back to the memorial tablet. There was a cinerary urn under each memorial tablet. Could it be that the mystery was hidden in these cinerary urns? At this moment, she no longer cared about the dead or being struck by lightning. If she really wanted to blame someone, when she entered the underworld, she would personally kowtow to the Shui family's martyrs 1,000 times. But she had to save Xiahou Qing's life. She opened the cinerary urns one by one and did not find any problems. Then she tried to move the cinerary urns, but there was no movement. No, it was not like this. Or was there a problem with the arrangement of the straw men's armor? It was said that the ancestors of the Shui family had left behind a set of special military strategies for their descendants. However, those who knew about this military strategy were almost all dead. Only Shui Hongyi's child, whose name was unknown, was left alive. That child had spent many years planning today's revenge. Even if he knew, he wouldn't tell her. Ningxu, calm down. Think again. There must be a solution. She was like a tireless spinning top, constantly running around this gloomy and damp tomb. She didn't know when her fingers had been cut by a rusty weapon while she was searching, but she didn't feel it at all. Xiahou Qing's breath was getting weaker and weaker, like a strand of spider silk stretched to its limit, which could break at any time. Ningxu pressed her head against his chest and pleaded softly, "Xiahou Qing, hold on a little longer, wait for me. I will definitely think of a way to get you out of here. Just wait for me for a while, just a while, okay?" However, the transparent spider silk still broke. Suddenly, her brain exploded with a bloody mist. Her heart felt like it had been cut by a knife, turning into a bloody mess. Her 2 hands covered in blood held his cheeks. Like a madman, she pressed her lips tightly against his, passing air into his mouth. It was like she was using this extremely clumsy method to connect the spider silk. "You said that since I had already boarded your pirate ship, I shouldn't think about getting off. You said that you wouldn't die for a while, and you even made me copy 1,000 times as punishment. I haven't even copied a single word. How can you go back on your words?" "No, I won't allow it. Come back for me." A huge sense of confusion and fear came at her from all directions. It was so fierce that it almost crushed her whole body. After her rebirth, she had been in danger many times, but only this time, she was at a loss and fell into a state of fear. What should she do? Who could tell her? What should she do? 10 kings of hell, black and white impermanence, come out. I'll make a deal with you. How about giving half of my life to him? She kept sucking in fresh air, passing it into his mouth without stopping for a moment. After an unknown amount of time, she felt the tip of his tongue move. Gently, like a small fish, it touched her tongue. In an instant, Ningxu cried. Tears fell under his eyes. As if he was scalded by the tears, Xiahou Qing weakly trembled his thick eyelashes. The tip of his tongue moved again, licking her lips that she had bitten. Ningxu opened her eyes wide and pulled her lips away from his. "Why are you crying?" His voice was extremely hoarse, but his eyebrows were wrinkled. Ningxu turned her head away to wipe her tears. "This lady isn't crying, I'm just hungry. I heard from a story that there were 2 fishermen who went fishing together. Halfway through, they encountered a storm and lost their way. They didn't have any food, so one of the fishermen ate the other until they were rescued. I was wondering if I should eat you to survive." He laughed intermittently. "If that's the case, you should eat me. But there's poison on my body. Remember to roast me first before eating me. You really have a problem." Ningxu couldn't stop her tears from rolling out. She hurriedly raised her head to let the tears flow back. In a daze, she suddenly found that the strange protruding stone above her head was faintly aligned with the celestial constellations. She pinched her sleeves and hurriedly wiped away her tears. She raised her head to look carefully, and then her gaze fell on the straw-armored men. "I know how to get out." Chapter 375. Without a moment of hesitation, Ningxu immediately rushed over and pulled out the broken swords one by one. Following the arrangement of the stars above her head, she inserted them one by one into the hands of the armored strawmen. In less than half an hour, the 42 strawmen holding the swords corresponded to the stars one by one. Shui family's insignia fire tiger corresponded to the 36 mansions star. The remaining 6 stars, Dub, Merak, Fector, Megrez, Aliath, and Mizar, were in the shape of the Big Dipper. The only one left was the army destroyer. With beads of sweat rolling down her forehead, Ningxu thought for a moment and clenched her fists. She looked back at Xiahou Qing, closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she lifted her feet. Xiahou Qing seemed to be aware of her intention. He shouted in a hoarse voice, "Ningxu, what are you doing? Come back." He struggled to get up from the ground. There was a fishy taste in his throat. He bent over and spat out a mouthful of blood. But he was not in the mood to pay attention to it. Only the army destroyer is left among the 43 stars. It symbolizes a dangerous situation. You want to replace it? Do you want to die? Because of the anger in his heart, blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth again. He covered his chest and slowed down his voice. He waved his pale hand at her and coaxed, "There must be more than one way to get out. Be good and come back to me. I don't feel well." He rarely called her by her name. It was even more rare for him to take the initiative to show his weak side to her. Ningxu's heart ached as if someone had dug out a piece of it. She pulled up the corner of her mouth and smiled. The Big Dipper's handle points to the east. It symbolizes the vitality of spring. I believe that the Shui family has been loyal and benevolent for generations. They will leave us a way out. Don't worry, she said and walked towards the direction of the army destroyer step by step. Until she took the last step, she stood still. When she took the last step, the dome above her suddenly made the sound of a mechanism turning. Shio, 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 shio. 4 swords shot out from the 4 directions at the same time. The target was Ningxu. Her pupils constricted and she closed her eyes subconsciously. However, the pain she had imagined did not come. She opened her eyes and found that the 4 swords had landed by her feet and sides. If she had dodged out of fear, she would have dodged one of the swords. The other swords would have mercilessly cut through her skin and severed her bones and flesh. Fine beads of sweat fell to the ground and seeped into the soil. Ningxu's face showed a smile of having survived a disaster. When she took a step forward, she realized that her legs were already numb. Which ancestor of the Shui family set up such a tricky test? When she entered the underworld in the future, she had to properly pay respects to this senior. This was simply too cruel. But fortunately, she passed. After a short while, the underground palace roars even louder. Just behind the position of the Vanquisher star where Ningxu is standing, a small door suddenly opens in the molten iron wall. It is dark and deep inside the door, but it represents the sweetest rebirth in the world. Ningxu? Xiahou Qing called out worriedly after not hearing her voice for a long time. Ningxu smiled like a flower and her eyes were full of tenderness. Don't worry, Shizzy. My daughter is the reincarnation of the 9-life cat. She is living well. I will take you out. Without delay, Ningxu bent down and put his good arm around her shoulder. She used all her strength to support him and steady him. Xiahou Qing refused her support. The blood at the corner of his mouth made his face look abnormally fragile, like a piece of glass that could shatter at any time. However, this person made of ice spoke with a serious and cold tone that she had never heard before. You're lucky that you didn't die today. If there's a next time when you make your own decisions without consulting me and risk your life, you don't have to stay by my side. Our alliance can also be cancelled. Ningxu, do you understand? Chapter 376. Ningxu was stunned for a moment. She lowered her head and said, I understand. I promise I won't do it again. Only then did Xiahou Qing relax his furrowed brows and lean his body on her thin shoulder. 2 people and a silhouette walked out of the small door that had been opened. Maybe it was because the path was too long or because the secret passage was too quiet, but a trace of grievance quietly slid into Ningxu's heart. She bit her lips and muttered, I was just anxious to save you. In the dark, he wrapped one arm around her slender white neck and thin shoulder. His other hand was on the stone wall, trying not to be too heavy a burden for her. Feeling the grievance of the little girl beside him and her slightly nasal voice, The ice in his chest melted like water, turning into a breath that gently brushed past her ear. He tilted his head and softly said, "I know, but if you die, my life will have no meaning." Ning-Shu never knew that she loved to cry so much. She couldn't bear any grievances and was so easily swayed. A single sentence could make her want to cry countless times today. She was too timid. It was not like her, Ning-Shu. But she didn't feel that bad. Her body was tired, her eyes were sore, and her heart was full. She knew that this thing was called love. After walking for a long time in the secret passage, the weak light of the torch was almost completely extinguished. Finally, light poured in from the end of the secret passage. Half of her heart was put down. Ning-Shu let out a breath and excitedly sped up. She supported Xiahou Qing up the wooden stairs and finally arrived at the end of the passage in front of the wooden board. She reached out her hand and lifted the wooden board. Xiahou Qing's ears suddenly moved. His palm pressed down on her shoulder. "Wait, there's a person's voice." But he was still a step too slow. Ning-Shu was about to stop, but the wooden board had already been moved by her. The next moment, the wooden plank was kicked away, and a dagger aimed at Ning-Shu's forehead flew through the air. Standing on the wooden ladder and supporting Xiahou Qing, Ning-Shu had no strength to escape. At the critical moment, Xiahou Qing's arm pressed Ning-Shu's head against his chest. His bloody hand hugged her waist and flew out of the secret passage. The sound of a sharp weapon cutting through flesh was heard. Xiahou Qing let out a muffled groan from the bottom of his throat. Holding Ning-Shu in his arms, he fell onto the broken seat next to him. Even at the moment before he lost consciousness, he still leaned to the side and protected her in his arms, using him as her shield. She was about to go crazy. She couldn't even bear to get angry at such a person, so how could they dare? Seeing that the attack was successful, the person who had launched the sneak attack immediately retreated. Ning-Shu's lips trembled as she took out the broken piece of metal she had taken from the armored straw man. However, through the gap between his arms that were wrapped around the back of her head, she saw a pair of astonished eyes that she could never have imagined. Her eyes trembled violently, and the color of her lips faded. She asked each and every word with bloodthirst, "How could it be you?" The owner of the pair of eyes retreated a few steps in shock, almost falling down in a sorry state. He dodged and turned his face away. This person had a friendly round face, and his eyes were also round. He was known to have a good temper. He would smile at anyone he saw, and would never get angry. This person looked like a young man, but he had the sense of responsibility and manliness that many old and cunning officials lacked. This person had once said to her anxiously and expectantly, "I admire the mountains and rivers. If there comes a day when I'm lucky enough to fulfill my promise with my father and leave the capital, would you be willing to travel with me?" When this person found out that he was the one who had been deceived, he turned around and apologized to her, saying that he had been reckless and had caused such a misunderstanding. He also swore that he would never reveal her secret. This person had once said with incomparable sincerity, "Before you really make a decision, could you please let me continue to admire you? I know this is very presumptuous, but I really can't control my heart. I'll do my best to not cause you any trouble. If I've accidentally caused you any trouble, feel free to tell me. I'll definitely keep my distance." She didn't have any romantic feelings for this person, but in her heart, he was a gentleman who was worth befriending, a friend who was worth being honest with. But it was also this person who had just shattered all the good impressions she had of him, leaving only a detestable face. "Tan, Sai, Wei, tell me, why is it you?" she hissed and questioned, her hands desperately trying to cover the bleeding hole in Xiahou Qing's back. Chapter 377. There were tears in Tan Siwei's eyes. His eyes, which were always smiling, were full of shame and embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it was you who came out. I'm really sorry. I'll help you up." The moment he reached out his hands, Ning-Shu grabbed a handful of cotton from the broken pillow next to her and sprinkled it in his eyes. Tan Siwei was caught off guard and subconsciously covered his eyes. Ning-Shu took the opportunity to slip out of Xiahou Qing's arms and floated to him like a snake. She put the broken iron piece in her palm on his neck and said coldly, This is a remote place. You shouldn't have walked here. Moreover, this place is connected to the ancestral grave of the Shui family. You won't show your face in public in order to hide your identity. Carry Xiahou heir on your back to your carriage and send us to Prince Nanping's mansion immediately. Along the way, the copper piece in my hand will always be in front of your neck. If you dare to have a trace of disloyalty or delay, don't blame me for disregarding our friendship and beheading you. Tan Siwei, I mean what I say. The thin iron piece mercilessly drew a line of blood on his neck. Tan Siwei never thought that Ning Shu, who had always been gentle with him, would have such a ruthless side. He also didn't expect that they would come to this point. He was forced to raise his head and be controlled by her. He lowered his eyes and looked at her bitterly. Don't worry. I'll do whatever you ask me to do. I won't act rashly. Lower the iron piece. I'm going to bend down and carry Xiahou heir on my back. Ning Shu's red eyes stared at him without blinking. She watched him carry Xiahou Qing on his back and then leave the deserted hut step by step. He boarded the carriage and then ordered the driver to put Xiahou Qing down carefully. The driver was scared out of his wits. Just as he was about to loyally save his master, Tan Siwei closed his eyes and shook his head gently at him, motioning him to quickly get the carriage. Along the way, the four of them didn't speak. Ning Shu held the thin piece of metal in one hand and pressed it against Tan Siwei's neck, not leaving it for an instant. She also diverted some of her attention to use her teary red eyes to pay close attention to the completely unconscious Xiahou Qing lying on her lap. She looked at the person she had painstakingly pulled back from the gates of hell not long ago. That weak life force once again poured out from his body. She desperately screamed in her heart, begging him to hold on a little longer. Just 2 more hours, no, half an hour would be enough. She had countless words that she wanted to shout out, but when they reached her throat, it was as if she had lost her tongue and could not utter a single word. All she could do was desperately use her hands to cover the bloody hole couldn't be blocked. How could there be so much blood in a person's body? Xiahou Qing, could it be that you were made by the river of forgetfulness? I order you to stop bleeding. I beg you to stop. Her previous calmness and indifference were all thrown out of the window. She once again cut the metal piece into Tan Siwei's flesh. Like a madwoman, she shouted at the coachman outside, if you want your master to live, you better go faster. I want this horse to run faster than anything else. So fast that it could catch up to his flowing life. Hearing Tan Siwei's pained cry, the driver's heart tightened. He quickly swung the horse whip hard. The horse let out a neigh and dropped its hooves even faster. Perhaps a long time had passed, or perhaps it had only been a cup of tea in a tea house, or half a play in a storyteller's story, but the horse pulled the wheel like it was flying over the hottest sun of early summer and the busiest street in Jingdo. Under the shocked and curious gazes of bystanders, it finally stopped and fell with a boom in front of the gate of the Prince of Nanping's Fu. Chapter 378. She stumbled out of the carriage and shouted hoarsely, "Come on, save him! Come on, save him! Quick!" The guards of the mansion recognized that the half-blooded man in front of them was bodyguard Ning. They rushed over and carefully carried out Xiahou Qing. Hearing the news, Hui Mo stumbled out of the mansion. When he saw Xiahou Qing's condition, his face turned pale. He quickly took out a 9 turns life-prolonging elixir and fed it to Xiahou Qing. "What are you waiting for? Carry young master in immediately. I'll kill you if you're late." He hurried to catch up. When he looked back, he found that Ning Shu had been exhausted. She knelt on the ground and tears poured down like rain. Half of her body was covered with soil and half of her body was covered with blood. He leaned over to help her up. "Lady Ning." Ning Shu supported herself with both hands on the ground and urged, "Go and save him. Don't worry about me." Her voice had long been broken. Seeing this, Hui Mo gritted his teeth and chased after her. A cloud-piercing arrow shot into the blue sky. Jusi and Tian Wen, who had been digging in the ancestral grave of the Shui family for nearly a day and night, immediately led people back to the mansion. Tian Wen, who was inquiring about the news in the market, looked up at the arrow. He immediately mounted the horse and carried all the doctors in the best medicine hall in the capital one by one on the horse. The whole Nanping mansion was in a mess. Only she knelt in front of the Nanping mansion powerlessly and cried silently. Was she wrong? She clutched her empty heart tightly. Her tearful eyes were full of confusion. It was the first time since her rebirth that she was so confused. She was like a child who had lost her own child and could no longer find the way home. Had she really done something wrong? The man in her dream had warned her so loudly that she should stay away from love and abandon greed and anger. Otherwise, everyone would die because of her, including Xiahou Qing. But she was stubborn and turned a deaf ear to it. Now, was it her punishment? Yes, it must be. But why didn't it descend on her head? Why was it Xiahou Qing? Beside her, Tan Siwei didn't leave. He looked at Ning Shu, who he had never seen before, in a daze. He walked in front of her and reached out his hand, wanting to wipe away her tears. I'm sorry. I didn't know it would be like this. Shu, don't cry like that. Ning Shu turned her head away to avoid him. She stopped her tears and questioned him with her reddened eyes. Minister Tan, I only have one question for you. Are you the murderer in the case of the envoy's sudden death? Tan Siwei's pupils shrank. Slowly, he retracted his hand. It was early summer, and the sky was clear and blue. There was no room for messy clouds. Tan Siwei raised his head to look at the sky that was so high and far away that he could not reach. It was a little dazzling. The sun was so bright that no hidden darkness could hide from it. He quickly lowered his head to avoid it. That's right. The envoy's death was indeed my doing. That day, when Madame Feng went to Fangtai Pavilion to arrest her, I said that I did not notice how Feng Daren left the building. In fact, I lied. I saw with my own eyes how the procuress opened the secret passage, and how she sent Feng Daren out of the building. After that, she came up with such a vicious plan to kill and then frame Feng Daren. As for the reason why I did it, it was because the envoy had something on my Tan family. He used it to blackmail my Tan family into collaborating with a foreign country and becoming Southern Yang's puppet. Therefore, 9 days ago, he asked me to have a chat. That was why we quarreled so fiercely at the post house and parted on bad terms. However, as for what kind of evidence he had on my Tan family, it concerns the lives of the entire residents. Forgive me for not revealing it. Now that I have pleaded guilty, this case is over. Lady Ning, for the sake of the friendship between our two families, please let my Tan family live. I alone will be enough to be executed. Chapter 379. Tan Siwei pleaded guilty and was wanted by the guards. Miss, let me help you up. Zi Gui, who was recuperating in Prince Nanping's residence, heard the news and came out. He helped Ning Shu, who had not eaten or drunk for 24 hours, up from the ground. Fang Mama originally hated Shizi Yi for being on the brink of death because of her, but seeing her in this state, she could not vent her anger. She said with a straight face, "You look really bad. When Shizi Yi wakes up, he will think that I neglected you. Come with me to tidy up." Ning Shu weakly shook her head and stubbornly said, "There's no rush. I want to wait for Xiahou Qing to wake up." Fang Mama looked her up and down. "You are so dirty and covered in dust and blood. Shizi Yi is already weak. If you don't tidy up, I won't let you enter the room to see Shizi Yi." Ning Shu had no choice but to follow her to tidy up her clothes. After tidying up her clothes, Fang Mema brought a bowl of porridge and 2 side dishes. Her attitude was still businesslike. "The food doesn't have time to cook for you right now. Drink the porridge." Ning Shu moved her chapped lips. Her stomach was already empty, and she was grinding so hard that it hurt, but she just didn't have any appetite. Fang Mama continued to be displeased. "I don't care if you starve to death or not. But if you starve to death at Shizi Yi's bedside and startle him, I will not let it go." Ning Shu picked up the bowl of warm porridge and absent-mindedly stuffed it into her mouth. Her heart was constantly worried about Xiahou Qing's safety, who was a few doors away. She also thought about the time he put his arm around her waist and held her hand despite knowing the price he had to pay to save her. Her tears made the porridge go into her stomach until the bottom of the bowl was clean. Fang Mama cleaned up the bowls and chopsticks and turned to leave. Ning Shu wiped away the excess tears on her face and whispered, "Thank you, Fang Mama. Thank you for not blaming her and for being willing to talk to her." Fang Mama snorted, "Don't flatter yourself. If it weren't for the air, I wouldn't care about you." She took the bowl and chopsticks and stepped out of the door. After thinking for a while, she still left a handkerchief for her and said awkwardly, "Hurry up and wipe it clean. Don't drip your tears on the air. It's bad luck." "You're right. Xiahou Qing isn't dead yet. He won't die. You're not allowed to cry anymore. Do you hear me?" After wiping the water off her face, she blinked and took a deep breath. Then, she walked out of the hall and waited. Half an hour later, Hui Mo came out tiredly. His clothes were all wet as if he had just been fished out of the water. Ning Shu immediately went up to him. "How is he?" Hui Mo said, "This 9 turns life-prolonging pill was obtained after the Crown Prince was hit by the plum blossom kiss. His Royal Highness spent many years of effort to get it from the divine Dr. Lu Bujiu. Just in case, he wanted to see if he could save the Crown Prince's life from the hands of the King of Hell. There is only one pill in the whole world. Now that the Crown Prince has taken it, he shouldn't be in danger for the time being. But the Crown Prince has been poisoned for many years. His body is like a sand castle. It looks strong, but in fact, it is full of holes. Whether the Crown Prince's life can be saved completely depends on the face of the god." Ning Shu nodded and raised the corner of her mouth. The plum blossom kiss didn't kill him. The final secret hasn't been revealed yet. He won't let himself die in such a small matter. That person is very prideful. As if to convince herself, she nodded again. "Can I go in and see him?" Hui Mo said, "Of course, but don't touch the Crown Prince's wound." Ning Shu made a sound of acknowledgement and hurried in impatiently. Hui Mo hesitated for a moment and said, "Has Tan Shaoqing admitted that he committed the crime?" Ning Shu gave an affirmative answer. "Yes, and he has already told the whole process of his crime. As for imitating Xue Hongyi's crime, he found it when he was sorting out the files of the previous years. He felt that it was quite ruthless. Moreover, the Xue family had a hidden relationship with the envoys, which was quite confusing. And on the night of Li Yi's accident, he was also a bystander. So, the plan of framing Li Yi came up spontaneously. It was completely logical. Hui Mo nodded and stepped aside to let her in. Chapter 380. Because the 2 serious injuries were on his back, Xiahou Qing was carefully propped up on a soft pillow. In the past, he was someone who cared so much about his face that even if there was a crease on his clothes, he would force her to iron it 3 times. He couldn't even see it and had Nurse Fang supervise her work. Now, his hair was messy and hung behind his back and on his face. Ning Shu walked over quietly and bent down to tidy his hair one by one. She laid the cold black satin on the other side of the pillow. She curved her lips and said slowly, "Don't worry, I won't laugh at you. You have such a face, no matter what you do, you will look good. I won't lie to you." Xiahou Qing was sleeping soundly and didn't speak. Ning Shu said to herself, "You haven't bathed for 2 days. You must be very uncomfortable. Anyway, I have seen most of your body, so I won't be polite with you. I am so considerate, don't be too touched. If you were really touched, I would have to accept it." She brought over a basin of hot water and mixed it with some cold water. After carefully testing the temperature of the water, she rolled up her sleeves and began to wipe his face. She continued to mutter, "Speaking of which, this young miss is also a noble in her own residence, a young miss who is served every day. How did I end up serving you every day in your residence? We have to settle this account when we have time." Huemore and the other guards were still guarding the door. It was not as dark as the underground palace where she could hide her shyness. She was too embarrassed to take off his clothes, so she rolled up his wide sleeves and wiped his arms. When she wiped the inside of his left arm, Ning Shu suddenly froze. The handkerchief in her hand fell to the ground. Yesterday, she was anxious to check his wounds. Moreover, the underground palace was dark. Except for the 2 bloody wounds, she couldn't see the rest of his body, let alone the inside of his arm. At this moment, the golden afternoon sun shone through the lattice of the window into the hall. Everything was very clear. Ning Shu narrowed her eyes and looked at Xiahou Qing in disbelief. She asked Hui Mo, "Where did the pattern on your shiz's arm come from? Why does this shape look so much like a bite mark left behind by an angry woman?" There were 3 red dots at the top and bottom of the pattern, which looked like a bite mark. Hui Mo didn't doubt her and said honestly, "Well, don't talk nonsense. Prince Shizi was born with that birthmark." Ning Shu continued to smile and said, "That must be the love debt that your young master owed in his previous life. The girl must have bitten his arm with extreme hatred. Even reincarnation won't be able to dissipate it." At the same time, in her shocked heart, she recalled 100 years ago in the underworld, when she had returned from her 5th life after a tragic death. She had dared to sneak into King Chu Jiang's palace and coincidentally bumped into him bathing. At that time, she had just been skinned, and she had nowhere to vent her anger, so she disguised herself as a floating ghost and quietly walked to the side of the bathtub, wanting to see the true appearance of this famous flower in the underworld. 10 feet, 8 feet, 3 feet, 2 feet. She hid her body and was about to swim in front of him. Suddenly, an arm as heavy as a mountain attacked her and hung above her head. His face was still shrouded in thick fog. Only his eyes could be seen. His voice was like a cold bell. "Ning Shu, how dare you break into my palace without permission? You don't know life from death." At that time, Ning Shu, who had died 5 times, was tired of death. She was not afraid at all. She smiled and said, I know life from death the most. There is a saying in the mortal world, if I die under a peony flower, I will also be a romantic ghost. If your Highness King Chu Jiang can let me see your peerless elegance, I will be willing to die 10 more times. King Chu Jiang seemed to have been shocked by her shameless and shocking words. You are simply, after stuttering for a long time, he was unable to say another word. He withdrew his arm and said solemnly, "Quickly withdraw." However, her eyes were sharp. In a short time, she had caught a glimpse of the birthmark on his left arm. She casually made a joke about King Chu Jiang, one of the 10 kings of hell. Why does the pattern on the inside of your Highness's arm look like a tooth mark? Your Highness must have owed a love debt in the past, which caused the girl to bite your arm so deeply. She raised her eyebrows wickedly. I didn't expect your Highness to have such a romantic history. You really make me have a whole new level of respect for you. The atmosphere around King Chu Jiang changed a few times. In the end, he shouted, "Men, seize her." Chapter 381. In those long 300 years, she made him angry again and again, but time and time again, he could not bear it anymore, but in the end, he still gently put her down. Later, she became used to teasing him for fun, so that she could dispel the pain of being smashed into pieces every time she was punished by heaven. Later, under the bridge of helplessness, by the river of forgetfulness, he used up 1,000 years of cultivation to send her back to this life, to make up for 100 years of regret. Hui Mo stood by the side, looking at her crying, laughing, sighing, and frowning expression with a complicated expression. He directly suspected that she was too emotional and went crazy. Lady Ning, you, don't go crazy, I'm scared. Ning Shu gently exhaled, don't worry, I'm very sober now. Hui Mo's eyes were even more suspicious. Oh, I heard from Tian Wen that all crazy people say that they are sober. Ning Shu did not know whether to laugh or cry, too lazy to pay attention to him. She picked up the handkerchief on the ground, went to change it for a new one, and continued to wipe Xiahou Qing. Her heart finally confirmed this fact. So he was King Chu Jiang. That King Chu Jiang who was mysterious and reserved every day, always had a cold attitude towards her, and was unwilling to say a single word to her, yet had silently accompanied her for 300 years. Many inexplicable emotions, which even she herself found inconceivable, had a source. It was no wonder that when she first met him, her neck had almost been broken by him. However, she had a vague feeling that she wouldn't die, so she decided to steal his jade pendant. No wonder they met by chance and did not have a deep friendship, but she had a trust in him, firmly believing that he would lend a helping hand and form an alliance. No wonder he had to endure her countless times, But he still endured it, because it had already become a habit in the depths of his soul to indulge her. No wonder she had clearly made up her mind to not touch love in this life, but slowly, she still could not help but sink her feet into the mud. No wonder, Ning Shu softly sighed in his ear. You, as a ghost, why did you come to the human world to be immortal? You even put yourself in such a sorry state. You're really the most undignified immortal. There's no one like you in novels. If you don't get better soon, you won't be able to raise your head in front of your colleagues from the 10 halls. Why didn't I guess it? Both of you are very similar in personality. Both of you are secretive and serious all day long. Both of you are cold and aloof, like icebergs from beyond the heavens. Both of you attract bees and butterflies wherever you go. In the netherworld, you attract those beautiful female ghosts, and in the human world, you attract young ladies everywhere. In the past, you didn't even let me see your face. All day long, you used a camouflage spell to block my view. I tried my best, but I couldn't get my way. Now that I've seen most of your body, you didn't expect it, did you? When you regain your memories in the future, I'm going to make fun of you. Outside the window, the sun was shining brightly, carrying with it a wisp of cool breeze, shining on the two of them. It was as if two clouds were leisurely strolling on the horizon, coincidentally being blown by the wind of 10,000 li, merging into one place and becoming indistinguishable. She said again, "Wait for me here, I'll go and finish this case first. After 72 hours, I'll come back on time to find you, bringing my favorite lily shortcake. The shortcake is delicious, you'll like it too. When the time comes, you must wake up and eat all of it, otherwise I'll make you restless." After saying that, she put down the handkerchief and got up, leaving him to Hui Mo. When she stepped out of the door, her eyes had returned to the previous clear determination, like a sword that had been tempered by fire and washed by water, more determined than before. Chapter 382. The Vice Minister of the Supreme Court actually surrendered himself and was imprisoned. The moment this news came out, it immediately shocked the ears of all the officials. When Feng Zheng heard of this, he was so shocked that his old bones almost fell off his armchair and onto his back. This time, he didn't have time to pretend to be weak. He crawled up from the ground and rushed to the imperial palace with unprecedented speed to report this news to His Majesty. Aya, what should I do? My Yu's imperial court is going to be in chaos. At the entrance of the Supreme Court, Xue Qiongwei was making a scene. Get out of the way. My second brother can't kill anyone. Let me in. He is the Vice Minister of the Supreme Court, a fourth-rank official, and the Prime Minister's legitimate son. How dare you arrest him? The Supreme Court's bailiffs had bitter expressions. Miss Qiongwei, we also didn't want to lock Vice Minister up. But Shaoqing took the initiative to confess and told us the whole process of the crime in full detail. You also know that this is a serious case. Our heads are hanging on our waistbands. Please be magnanimous and don't make things difficult for us. Xue Qiongwei's voice trembled. He really said that he committed the crime? How could it be false? The bailiffs said. If it was someone else who reported it, there would be a possibility of framing him. However, Shaoqing was the one who admitted to it, and he even told him every detail of the crime. And in order to hide the truth, he almost killed Prince Nanping. Even now, we don't know if His Highness is still alive. Vice Minister had no choice but to confess. What else is there to talk about? Xue Qiongwei's face paled and tears seemed to flash in her eyes. She bit her lower lip and said, I don't care. His Majesty hasn't convicted him yet, right? Then he's still a suspect. Since that's the case, why don't you let me in to see him? I'll say it again, let me in. The bailiffs were in a difficult position, but because of her status, they didn't dare to be rough with her. Just as they were frowning, they saw Ning Shu coming from afar. They hurriedly diverted the trouble. Lady Ning was appointed by His Majesty to investigate this case. Whether or not you can enter depends on Lady Ning's golden mouth. Xue Qiongwei turned her head and met Ning Shu's calm eyes. Without waiting for the horse to stop, she had already rushed over and stretched out her arms to block the horse. The horse neighed in fright. Fortunately, Ning Shu controlled the horse in time, preventing it from trampling Xue Qiongwei to death on the spot. Xue Qiongwei opened her tightly shut eyes. The previously domineering Miss Biao of the Prime Minister's manor had a rare moment of humility. Lady Ning, please let me in to see second brother. He must have been bewitched for a moment to spout nonsense. A person like him wouldn't even dare to kill a chicken. How could he possibly kill someone? Let me go in and persuade him. He will definitely tell the truth. Lady Ning, he's your fiancé. You're bound together for good or ill. If he's convicted, you won't get any benefits either. Ning Shu pulled the reins and looked down at her. Miss Bella, how can you be sure that he's talking nonsense and not telling the truth? Didn't he say it before? On the night of the crime, he stayed overnight in the Supreme Court to check the list of criminals. Both Deputy Minister Zheng and Deputy Minister Xie can testify for him. Why don't you believe him? I know. You must be holding a grudge against me for purposely getting close to second brother, right? I know I was wrong. I apologize to you. I promise I'll stay far away from him in the future. I won't disturb you or be an eyesore. Can't you just help him? Looking at her teary eyes, Ning Shu shook her head and said, Bella, you misunderstand. I believe him, so after he spoke, I dispelled my suspicions. But just now, I received news that Deputy Minister Zheng and Deputy Minister Xie personally admitted that at the beginning of the night, they were indeed accompanying Minister Tan to check the list of criminals. However, at night, Minister Tan used the excuse that there was a problem with a portion of the list and needed to go to the warehouse to check it again. Deputy Minister Zheng offered to accompany them, but Minister Tan declined and insisted on going alone. After that, Deputy Zheng and Deputy Xie were tired from working and took a nap on their desks. When they woke up around 3 in the morning, Deputy Xie asked when he would be back. Deputy Tan said around 3 in the morning, so the two believed him. However, was that really the case? During this period of time, he was completely alone. Who would know if he was really working in the warehouse or deliberately sending people away? His alibi isn't enough to convince the public. Chapter 383. Xue Qiongwei clenched her fists tightly and her eyes reddened. She clenched her teeth and said in a trembling voice after a long time, no matter what, I believe him. Lady Ning, I don't have any excessive requests. I just want to see him and talk to him. I won't affect your case. As long as he tells me personally that he was the one who committed this crime, I won't say anything else. Xue Qiongwei's expression was almost pleading. Ning Shu thought for a moment and jumped down from the horse. Come with me. She used to be very familiar with the Supreme Court's yamen. Every few days, she would come to bother Tan Siwei. This was like her second home. This was the first time Xue Qiongwei was so nervous. Her expression was so tense, as if she was walking on the edge of a cliff. It was still the same person, with his trademark round face that smiled at everyone. However, he had taken off his sapphire blue official robe and was now a prisoner. When Ning Shu brought Xue Qiongwei in, he was staring at the iron bars in a daze. When he saw Ning Shu, he came back to his senses and smiled bitterly. Shu is still willing to see me, but I don't have the face to see you. Xue Qiongwei walked out from behind Ning Shu. Second brother, Tan Siwei's smile froze and he frowned. Qiongwei, what are you doing here? This case has nothing to do with you, and it has nothing to do with the Prime Minister's residence. Go back immediately. Xue Qiongwei ran over with a sobbing voice and said, Second brother, tell me quickly. You didn't commit this crime at all, and you didn't kill that person. Tell me everything. Tan Siwei's face was ashen. You have to make a lot of decisions in life. Some are right and some are wrong. But no matter what, you have to bear the consequences of your decisions. Whether it's you, big brother, father, or mother, it has nothing to do with you. Qiongwei, go back and tell them that I'll bear the consequences of my own mistakes. Don't interfere. Let this case end with me. But no buts. Tan Siwei interrupted her. I know you're protecting me and don't want to believe that I'm such a vicious person, but that's the truth. 9 days ago, The envoy publicly offended me and even said that if I didn't want to become his lackey and be ordered around by him, he would destroy the entire Tan clan. Ever since that incident, I harbored a grudge in my heart. For the sake of the Tan family, as well as for my own career, I secretly planned this case. The first reason was to silence him, and the second reason was to vent my anger. After the case broke out, I even pretended to be righteous in Funning Palace and offered to help Lady Ning solve the case. Actually, it was all part of my scheme. I wanted to know the progress of Lady Ning's investigation and what evidence she had. Then, I secretly tampered with it and tried my best to cover up my crimes. Bella, I'm actually a vicious and merciless person deep down in my bones. It's just that I've always pretended to be a modest, noble, and proud gentleman in the past, deceiving all of you. The real me is so hypocritical. Now, I've also harmed the heir of the Duke of Nanping. The matter has been exposed, and I can't cover it up anymore. That's why I took the initiative to admit my guilt and ask for leniency. A person like me doesn't deserve to be remembered by any of you, and I don't deserve to be remembered by any of you. Go back and continue living well in the future. I've brought shame to the Tan family, and I've let my ancestors down. Just pretend that I never existed. How can I pretend that you never existed? You're the second brother who grew up with me. There were so many nights when I secretly hid in bed and cried. It was always you who held my hand and comforted me, saying, "Bella, don't be afraid, and don't be lonely. With your second brother here, the Prime Minister's residence will be your home in the future." Tears streamed down her face as she held his hand tightly. Her eyes were filled with countless emotions that couldn't be separated. Without you, how can I live on? Tan Siwei sighed softly. You remember how I comforted you, but you forgot that the reason you cried was because the Prime Minister's residence treated you too poorly. In this world, there's no one who can't live without another. You've already grown up, and I can't protect you in the future. You don't need me anymore. As for Mother, I'll leave a letter for her, asking her to give up. In the future, you can live in the Prime Minister's residence for as long as you want. It's up to you to decide who you want to marry. You're a very, very good girl. It's just that your personality is rash and impatient. You'll have to change that in the future. Tan Siwei teased. Of course, it's fine if you can't change it. You're not a bad person. In the future, you'll definitely meet a good man who can give you happiness. Her tears fell even more fiercely. Xue Qiongwei's heart felt like it was being twisted by a knife. You know everything, right? Yes, I didn't realize it at first, but I found out later. Tan Siwei raised his hand, wanting to wipe away the tears on her cheeks, but stopped at the last minute. Instead, he gently patted her head. When you were 5 years old, uncle and aunt passed away in an accident. Father brought you into the residence. You were only a little bit tall, and in the blink of an eye, you've already grown so big. I'm a wooden person, and sometimes I can't react in time. I still habitually treat you as the little girl from back then. My body language caused you to misunderstand a lot. It wasn't until a few days ago when you targeted Shu that I realized it was all my fault. I also thought about it later. Actually, you don't really have romantic feelings for me. It's more like you're attached to your family when you're isolated and helpless. We were really close when we were young. Now, it's time to say goodbye. Go, don't cry. It's not worth it for me. Chapter 384. Driven away by Tan Siwei resolutely, Xue Qiongwei left in tears. Tan Siwei closed his eyes tiredly and leaned his forehead against the cold iron bars. After watching this scene from the side, Ning Shu slowly walked forward and stood in front of him. In the silent prison, her voice sounded particularly ethereal. Don't you have anything to say to me? Across the rusty iron bars, Tan Siwei lowered his eyes. What is there to say? The truth is out. I don't have the ability to defend myself even if I want to. It's just that I committed such a big crime and still came to your mansion to ask for your hand in marriage. I want to drag you down with me. I'm sorry. Don't worry. Before I'm beheaded, I'll give you the annulment of our marriage. As for the reputation that I've implicated you, I'll apologize to you when I go to hell. Has the truth really come to light? Ning Shu took another step closer, and her eyes were only inches away from his evasive gaze. Or are you trying to hide something? So far, you've been able to explain most of the links, but don't forget that there are still many doubts. I couldn't control my emotions before, but it doesn't mean that I didn't notice it. Now, please answer me. First, what's your relationship with the Shui family? Why did you appear in that hut today? Second, when Xiaoho and I came out of the secret passage, there was another person in the hut besides you. Who was that person? Third, if the case was really done by you that night, after you led Zhu Xiong into the building as a scapegoat, you should have seen him leave. Then, how did you leave from the Fang-seeking platform? Who locked the door for you? Tan Siwei took a deep breath and returned to the center of the cage. He lifted the hem of his robe and sat on the ground. Now, I have nothing to hide from you. First question, I have no relationship with the Shui family. I just happened to have insight into the past of her family from the old case file. By chance, I learned the secret of her family's ancestral tomb, which was hidden in the hut where Madame Shui lived before her death. After learning that you went missing in the Shui family's ancestral tomb, I was a little hesitant about whether or not I should block this secret passage and prevent you from reappearing after 5 days. The case of the envoy will be smoothly pushed to Zhu Xiong according to my plan, and the case will end there. It's just that I didn't expect that you would come out so coincidentally just as I arrived. The second question, the man who left was my personal servant. He had some skills. In a moment of desperation, he attacked Xiaoho. I was afraid that his life would be in danger, so I ordered him to leave quickly. The third question, you should have guessed the answer. It's Su Su. The identity of the Vice-Chancellor of the Supreme Court is too convenient. This means that as long as I want to investigate, there's nothing that I can't find out. Moreover, it's perfectly justifiable. No one will suspect me. Just like what I did before, I easily fooled you. Tan Siwei chuckled softly. A strand of hair on his forehead quivered. So, I successfully caught Susu's weakness. She is a descendant of the Shui family. I used this to coerce and bribe her to help me. In addition to my identity as an official of the imperial court, she naturally wouldn't refuse my request. I didn't tell her that I framed Zhu Xiong. I only asked her to do 2 things. The first was to deliberately make the envoy unhappy after drugging him and make him leave the room alone. The second was to wait for me to leave the Xuanfang terrace after I finished the crime and lock the door for me. Her previous confession was taught by me, and her alibi was also carefully designed by me for her. During the period from the Z hour to the Chou hour, there was indeed a maidservant in her room to testify for her. After Zhu Xiong escaped, I hurriedly left at the Chou hour. She waited for a moment, and when the maidservant was asleep, she quietly locked the door, perfectly avoiding suspicion of the crime. If it weren't for me, how could a brothel girl like her obtain something like the 10 fragrant tendons powder? Ning Shu frowned. She still didn't understand. Why did you insist on locking the door of the secret passage? If you let it open, wouldn't it be more believable that Zhu Xiong committed the crime and escaped? The corner of Tan Siwei's mouth twitched. He boasted shamelessly, because of my remaining hypocrisy. My original intention was that no one would be able to find out and I would directly throw the suspicion on the dead Shui Hongi. That way, everyone would be happy. If Shui Hongi, as a shield, wasn't useful, then I would have to wrong Brother Zhu. I have done my best for him. Unfortunately, God wants him to die. It's not my fault. Chapter 385. Such shameless words attracted the attention of the other bailiffs. No one would have thought that the generous and kind Tan Shaoqing, who was always smiling like a Buddha, was actually such a despicable person. Only Ning Shu still maintained that calm and composed expression. Then Shui Ran, how did you find his tracks, and why did he help you set up the trap? Tan Siwei shook his head. I didn't find him. He approached me. I don't know how he found out that I had fallen out with the envoy. He approached me several times and fanned the flames. Of course, I wanted to kill him, so I didn't need him to do anything. So the 2 of us, one wolf and the other wolf, each with their own thoughts, became a perfect partner. Together, we did this big case that shocked Jojo. No matter how bright the sun was outside, it couldn't shine into the Supreme Court's dungeon. After years of immersion in this darkness, the surroundings were filled with a bone-chilling cold. Looking at Tan Siwei, who sat on the ground expressionlessly, Ningxu didn't know why, but she had an inexplicable feeling in her heart. Tan Siwei had clearly matched every detail of the case, but her intuition told her that the truth was not so simple. Tan Siwei was still hiding something from her. There must be more, she said. Xiaoqing always says that you're not an official material, but I think you're too modest. Xiaoqing's logic is tight and his thinking is better than others. Every piece of evidence is tightly connected and no one can find a flaw. Besides you, there's no other suitable candidate for the position of Supreme Court Xiaoqing. There's only one thing in the hut: in order to save the servant's life, you ordered him to leave quickly, but you stayed behind to face me and Prince Xiaoho. This doesn't make sense. Is that servant's life more important than Xiaoqing's own? Tan Siwei said, that servant and I have been friends since childhood. At that time, I also wanted to leave, but I was too weak and didn't have time. I had already chosen a broken vase to knock you out, but when I saw how weak half of your body was, my indecisiveness acted up again. In the blink of an eye, you saw through my disguise no matter how much I wanted to hide. If I was given another chance, I might not be so soft-hearted. Ningxu chuckled softly. In that case, I have to thank Xiaoqing for sparing my life. You're welcome. Coming out of the prison, Ningxu's expression was unusually solemn, as if she had encountered an even bigger problem. Deputy Qiu, who she had arranged to interrogate Bai Susu alone, also came out. Ningxu asked, "What did Bai Susu say?" She changed her statement, Minister Qiu said. Previously, Minister Tan promised her that he wouldn't implicate her. But now that Minister Tan can't even protect himself, Bai Susu confessed everything after losing her backer. According to her, everything she did was because Tan Xiaoqing threatened her. Tan Xiaoqing was also the one who killed her. At most, she can only be considered an accomplice. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your hard work. After sending Minister Qiu away, Ningxu's eyes flashed with a faint light. She ordered someone to bring Forsythia out of the prison for interrogation. Lian Xiao blinked and said seriously, "Miss, after I listened to your orders and joined them, I've been sticking to Bai Susu all the time like a piece of plaster. I can guarantee with my eyes that ever since she was sent to prison, Tan Xiaoqing has never come to see her alone, not even once. Absolutely not. In the past 2 days, did anyone interrogate Bai Susu, or did anyone pass her anything? Did you notice anything?" Forsythia's head was like a rattle drum. No. It was peaceful these 2 days. Even when the guards came to deliver the food, I was the first to rush over to check it secretly. Then, I distributed it to the others. I really didn't notice anything wrong. Ningxu's eyes flashed with a long thought. Could it be that Bai Susu was telling the truth this time? Was the murderer really Tan Xiaoqing? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.